So here I am in Scarborough at Meleyal's house. It's January the 16th, 2026. Kate Jennifer recording for the Seen But Not Heard project. Okay, so Lel, let's start from the beginning. Could you tell me, start from where you were born, that kind of history, and then we'll just go on.
Okay, well, I was born in Head and Road Maternity Hospital. My mum had a caesarean. She was 18 and she was from Hessel Road. She was from Rugby Street, and she was married to my dad. They were married very young, and so I was born first of all in Liverpool Street. I went home to Liverpool Street, and then we went up a notch and went to Hawthorne Avenue, and then we ended up in Woodcock Street before my dad finally got a council house and we ended up in Gypsyville. So, but my entire family lived in Hessel Road. Roundabout St George's Road was like the epicentre of where my entire family lived. So yeah, I grew up on Hessel Road.
And can you tell me something about their occupations or?
Okay, my dad was a baker. When I say he was a baker, he worked in a factory. He worked in the Wonderloaf factory. So he was actually a factory charge hand that worked in a bakery, but he called himself a baker. And my mum was a housewife. I had two sisters. Everybody else in the family was involved in the fishing industry. My gran was a fish packer at Birdseye. My Uncle Dave was a bobber. My granddad was an ex-renowned trawler skipper. And my various uncles. One of my uncles had stopped going to sea and he'd got a little shop down Rosamond Street, a little grocer's shop. And my Uncle Keith had gone to sea and he'd had an injury, so he'd stopped. And I think that's all of them. Me granddad on my mum's side was disabled. He'd been a submariner during the war and he'd sank, and he'd got emphysema through being in the water. So he was, all of his life he was disabled, and he lived in Rugby Street. So that was kind of the extended family all lived around Hessel Road.
And tell me about where you went to school, and imagine your beginning at the beginning of your life. Just
went to Westbourne Street School, infant school. Not much to say about that really, other than we had an extended holiday in Belfast to go and see some friends. I think my mum had left my dad, to be perfectly honest, because we were in Belfast a long time for a holiday. But anyway, we ended up going back. The only thing to say about Westbourne Street is when I went back to Westbourne Street School, they sent me home because I didn't speak the Queen's English, because I'd picked up an Irish accent for some time, which was funny really. That's all I really remember about Westbourne Street School. And then I went to, because my dad had got a council house in Gypsyville, I ended up at Francis Askew Fanny Ag junior school, and then went to Kingston, which was literally just gone from it became a comp the year I started. Before that it was, a grammar school. So it was still very much kind of grammar school, uniforms and all the rest. I had quite a break in education, which was difficult and brilliant, because I smashed my legs up really badly when I was a kid, and I had to have quite a lot of operations on my legs, and I was out of action for a long time. I was in traction for the best part of a year.
Wow.
And that was the worst thing that happened to me, because of all the pain and the suffering and the fact that I was in plaster cast, which also made me different to my peers, and I was out of sync with all my peers at school. But also the best thing that happened, because I was in traction and I had to have a teacher come to give me lessons, but she only came once a week, and so she gave me projects, and I think that was where my thirst for knowledge came from. I also learned to type because I was in traction and I couldn't write because I was laid down, so she brought me a typewriter, and and I learned to type. Like literally, when I was like 6 years old, I learned to type, and I am the fastest typist you are ever going to see. Kath loves watching me type because I don't look at the keys, and I am super fast typist. And so that happened because I smashed my legs up, so it's all swings and roundabouts. But it did cause problems with my education. I left school with nothing. I left school with an RSA in typing, funnily enough. And that was what I left school with. But that partly because, I'd lost a lot of school, really. So yeah, swings and roundabouts.
And after school?
After school, I went to work at Brown's Bookshop as a switchboard operator, a telephone switchboard operator, and I loved working at Brown's because I was completely surrounded by books, which is my happy place, and I met some amazing people at Brown's, and I was really happy there, and as a consequence of that I got a job as a library assistant. And when I was 18, I met a bloke and got married and had a child, because that is what 18-year-old working class women did, and that was it. I had a child. But also at that time, I was starting to realise that I liked women, and I couldn't have even said those words then. I started to realise that there was something wrong with me, it's said in inverted commas, because I liked looking at girls, and that was a really confusing time. I still got married and still had a child, but I knew that there was something wrong with me at that point, and that was really confusing. I didn't know what it was. I mean, I genuinely didn't know what it was. I didn't know the word lesbian. I just knew that there was something not right with me, as I perceived it at the time. So this is a bit of a super zip by, but what happened, and I can show you a photograph of this very moment, in fact, what happened is I was in town one day and I was walking my son in his pram. He would have been about 1, and I came across, where the hell is it? I came across this.
Do you want to say what's in the picture?
Right, I'm showing you a photograph of a demonstration at the William Wilberforce statue in Hull, which is a little mini demonstration of a group of women with a banner that says "Women of Hull Against Militarism," and it was a Hull Women's Collective gathering, and the women there just looked different. They just looked different. They just didn't look like any women I'd known. And what you can't see on here is that one of the women was wearing Doc Martens, and women then did not wear Doc Martens. There were men's work boots. Women just did not wear Doc Martens, but there was a woman wearing Doc Martens, and I just knew that they were my tribe. I just knew. I don't know how I knew, but it was like I fell in love with every single one of them. Every single one. And I looked on. I dared approach them. I dared approach them. I was utterly intimidated by these women. And it wasn't the politics. The sign on the photograph says the Hull Women's Collective, Women of Hull Against Militarism. Incidentally, I didn't take this photograph. Another woman took it, and I'll tell you about her in a minute. I didn't understand what they were doing. I had no idea what militarism was. I'd never heard of a women's collective. I didn't know what that was. I just knew that these women were different, and somehow that I was meant to meet them. I don't know what that was about. And then what happened is that this woman approached me, the woman who took this photograph, Saffron Waghorn, who was an artist, and in fact one of the founding members of Boulevard. And she approached me with a flyer, and the flyer was for an exhibition she was having, a photographic exhibition, and she also told me about the Hull Women's Centre, and she said that there was a talk going to be happening at the Hull Women's Centre on women in Palestine. I'd never heard of Palestine, I didn't know what it was. I had no idea what Palestine was. And I was welcome to go if I wanted. And I nearly passed out. Honest to God, I nearly passed out. And I took this flyer and literally ran away, pushing my son in his pram. And I knew I was going to go. And I went to the women's centre. That was an experience because it was down this grotty little side street on Springbank, virtually derelict because it was all being compulsorily purchased. The building was an old shop and it was virtually derelict, and I must have walked past it about 10 times, backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And I didn't know how you got in because the door was all boarded up, so I didn't know how you got in. And eventually I just thought, well, you either have to go home or you have to go. You just have to do it. And I knocked on the door and somebody opened and I went in, and they told me to go upstairs. And they also said to dunk my feet in this bowl of water because the building had dry rot and it was to stop me spreading spores from the dry rot around the building. So you had to dunk your feet in this bowl of water, which was that was how derelict it was. Don't go in the kitchen because the floor was going through. And I went upstairs and there was this woman, Nadine, giving a talk on Palestine. And she was Palestinian. Heritage was Palestinian. And she was giving this talk and it was impassioned. And the first thing I have to tell you is I walked in the room and I thought, there's a man in here. And I was really shocked. And I was really shocked because he was knitting. And then I realised it wasn't a man, it was a woman. One of the most handsome women I'd ever seen, a woman called Jan Gordon. And Dr. Jan Gordon she is now. She was one of the most handsome women I'd ever seen. I couldn't believe it, but I thought she was a man. She was so butch looking and sat there knitting. And then there was all these women, including Saffron, who handed me the original thing, and she was wearing Doc Martens, and I just was utterly bamboozled by the whole thing. The passion and the power and these women saying big words, and God, it was startling. And then Mindy came up after the talk and was so friendly and said, oh, come and have a cup of tea before you go. And I just thought, what a lovely woman. But she was actually the volunteer welcomer that night. You know, that was her job. It was her job to be nice to me. But I didn't know it was her job to be nice to me. And she took me downstairs and there was a little office and there was one of those Gestetners with where you wound them up, Gestetner printer thing, which is where they made the newsletters. And she told me about the COGS, the coordinating group of the Women's Centre. And she was one of the COGS and it was run collectively. I didn't know what collectively meant. And women volunteered to keep the centre running, and she told me about what happened at the centre and all the different kind of things that were happening, and why didn't I come along again? And I just absolutely knew I would. And then she said, this is all a bit of a potted history because of course it happened over a period of a few weeks, actually, not very many. She said that there was a party happening in the house that she lived in, and it was a couple of weeks going forward, and I was welcome to go if I wanted. And I said I would go. She gave me the address and said, oh, do come, you'll love it, you'll have a great time. And I think I knew on some level that it was a formative moment in my life. I think I just knew. It was like I couldn't possibly go to the party and I would go to the party, and I couldn't possibly go and I would. And I just knew. And I did go to the party where another woman called Carol Osgerby, who's still in Hull, she told me off wearing heels. I actually used this in a monologue that I wrote. Those shoes are a weapon of the patriarchy. I was like, what the fuck is she talking about? They're my best shoes. I got married in these shoes. I actually got married in those shoes. They were Roland Cartier wedge heels. And I was so proud of them because they were the most expensive shoes I'd ever worn. So I wore them to this party and she told me off for wearing them because they were a weapon of the patriarchy. And then I was sat on the stairs with Mindy, and I was utterly enchanted with Mindy. And I don't mean I fancied her because I never did fancy Mindy, but I was enchanted with her because she was so bubbly and so pretty, and she had these beautiful chocolate button eyes, and she was really bouncy and bubbly and friendly and cuddly and lovely, just lovely. And I was enchanted with her. And there was me and Mindy, probably a couple of other people, and Saffron, handsome butch, sat on the stairs, and Mindy said to me something like, "Oh, are you a lesbian?" And I was like, "Oh!" And Saffron just waved my head and said, "Of course she is, she won't be here otherwise." And do you know what? It's God's honest truth. In that minute, I knew I had to leave my husband. That very second, I knew I had to leave my husband. And I knew that my world had changed forever. And I never responded to that. And time moved, the history moved on. And I never responded to that. But I absolutely knew in that very second, I can picture it, that my life had changed forever. And that was the start of Boulevard, actually. That was the start of Boulevard, because me and Mindy became the closest of friends. I mean, we just became the closest of friends. Sisters. I was closer to Mindy and Alf than I ever have been to my own family, actually. And Mindy and Saffron were together. I didn't know that at the time. They were a couple. And that was where Boulevard was born, really, that in that very moment, because we became inseparable really quickly, and a sort of team. And Mindy was in a women's house, a shared house, and the two of the women in the house that she lived in had left the husbands and come out into lesbian feminism, and one of the women had never been married, but she was an active lesbian feminist involved in the peace movement and so on. But it was the history that had thrown them together. It wasn't kind of a desire to all live together, and so Mindy knew fairly quickly that what she wanted was something different. And so her and Saffron and me and Alf, who'd become really close friends, Alf was lovely, we just decided that we were going to buy a house together. And just like that, we're going to buy a house together, that's what we're going to do. And so I did leave my husband, and I went into there was a woman who had rented rooms, and I went to one of her rooms, and then we started looking for a house together, and we found Boulevard, and that's how Boulevard came about. But it came about where it was because it was cheap. It was 10 grand, and we had, between us, we had 10 grand because Mindy had a divorce settlement. I ended up with a bit of a separation settlement, and Alf had a job, Mindy had a job, I didn't have a job at that point. So we had enough money to be able to buy it, so without a mortgage, as I remember. So we bought it, and we could afford it, and it was derelict, it was falling apart. But we didn't care, we had the house. So that was kind of the trajectory, very fast trajectory, and it was much more difficult than that. But it was also really amazing because it was like, wow, all this is happening, it was really exciting time, actually.
Do you want to speak about the difficulty of it?
The difficulty was massive, and because I almost don't know how to say the difficulties were all around homophobia, as you would expect. Family rejection. I was absolutely rejected by my family, the whole family. I had absolutely terrible threats that my son was going to be taken off me, which in fact he sort of was eventually. I had to give him up because if I didn't give him up, they were going to force my hand and get social services involved and all the rest of it. So that was all really, really difficult. Funnily enough, my husband at the time wasn't particularly difficult about it, because we should never have got married. We got married as a bit of a lark. I don't think he was any more in love with me than I was with him. We were 18 years old. I don't know what we were doing getting married. I don't think he was that bothered, really. So we didn't really have that many difficulties, me and my ex, but my family were absolutely, what the fuck are you doing? What are you doing? You're bringing shame on the family. And they did everything in their power to stop it happening, and I didn't care because I'd found a tribe. But I did care, actually, and I had quite a lot of trauma caused by my family, including the constant, never-ending threat to have my son taken off me, which, of course, I've talked to my son about this quite recently. Now, if somebody kind of threatened me the way I was threatened then, I'd have said, go fuck yourself, try it on me, come at me if you want to. But then I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. Also, we knew loads of women in the 80s who were having the kids taken off them just because they were lesbians. They were losing custody of their own children purely because they were lesbians. That was a real threat then that people just cannot understand now. They don't understand that was a serious and real threat, and it was a real threat, and I was getting that all the time. And eventually, I let my son go and live with my mum, because my mum said if I didn't, then she'd have him taken off me by social services, which I was terrified of. So that's what happened. And in a way, I've talked to my son about this. I was really glad that it had stopped. I didn't mind my family rejecting me. They could reject me as much as they wanted, but I really needed the pressure to stop. And it did stop when my son went to live with my mum. It did stop. They didn't care about me after that. They didn't. They just let me go, which was fine. So I was then free. I was free of the responsibilities of childminding, and I was free of the pressure from the family. And it was enormous pressure, and it was all resolved later, years later. That was all sorted, but at the time it was pretty fucking hideous. It was a really tough time, and Boulevard also was not without its difficulties, because we were the lazy commune, we were the weirdos. There was a lot of suspicion on us, quite a lot of fear of us, actually, which was quite funny, sort of looking back on it, witchy power that we had. There were people that were actually quite scared of us. But when my son lived there, he went to the little school round the corner. I can't remember, there was a police station there, and Gordon Street, the little infant school, play school there, and none of his friends were allowed to come to our house, so he was quite isolated anyway. But nobody would let their kids come round to our place to let him play. So he was quite isolated anyway. But we used to have, our windows were spray painted. I think I might have told you this on the phone. I got into trouble with my dad, big style, because somebody had come and spray painted cunts on the front of the house, and Mindy then changed it to I think she put "We Are Lovely" on top of it. But then my dad came round to collect bill. Bear in mind, my dad hated everything about Boulevard, and he saw that, and he thought we'd done it, and so he was absolutely furious. He was furious with me because he thought we'd done that as some kind of showing off thing, not realising that it was a response to hideous graffiti that somebody else had put on the house. And so it caused all kinds of issues for me. My dad was absolutely livid with me. He wouldn't talk to me for weeks after that. But it was Mindy saying, we're not going to let you do this to us. We're not going to be ashamed. We're not going to be bothered. So it wasn't without its difficulties being there at all. But we lived next door to the Equasias. I think I've mentioned that before. It was a black Ghanaian African family, and they were experiencing racism as well in the community. So the two big houses together sort of had You know, we were sort of a defence, really, a mutual defence. We're almost too big to take on. We were quite imposing as a pair of houses. So I think we sort of supported each other. We always got on really well with the Equasias, and they were always got on really well with us. We never, despite the fact that they were quite Christian and a bit evangelical, I think, they never seemed to mind us, and we certainly didn't mind them at all. They didn't like our cats. They really didn't like our cats, but they didn't seem to mind us. And my son played with their son as well, so, you know, there was a connection there as well. But it wasn't, we did experience homophobia there, and we certainly got it from our families. Mindy's mum thought that she was having some kind of brain fart, I think, and that she'd come right in the end. She was a bit disappointed with Mindy, I think, but I think she just thought Mindy was having a bit of a show-off thing and that she'd come right. My family just thought I was mentally ill and that I needed help, and it was awful. And Alf's family were just lovely. They had, Alf had allegedly come out when she was 4 years old and said to her parents that she thought she was a lesbian, and they were fine with it. They were totally lovely, so we never got any shit from them. But all the shit we got was from my family. And Saffron had a bit of crap as well, but her family were in Wales, so we never really, we never experienced anything from her family. So that was the difficulty.
And do you want to tell us about Boulevard, like as if nobody knows any of that history? So explain us the address, what it was, all of it.
148 Boulevard, Richelieu Crescent was once upon a time the name of it. It was originally bought by one of the Helliers, who was one of the big fishing families in Hull, you know, the new trawler industries. So it was originally owned by one of the Helliers. It was a 3-storey, is that right? 3-storey house, yeah. The top 3 rooms would have been maids' quarters at one point, so quite small, compact little rooms. It had a palatial lounge, massive, great big ballroom of a room, had a scullery at the back, had a garden, and it had a massive front door, like a huge, great big Victorian front door, and it had those beautiful Victorian tiles in the front porchway. Massive, great big bay windows that went all the way up the top, and a little porched window at the top in one of the attic rooms. And it was virtually derelict when we bought it. It was in a right mess. Holes in the floor, the electrics didn't work, plumbing was awry, the gas was dodgy, just about everything, and we absolutely loved it. As soon as we saw the house, we'd seen 2 others. We knew what we were looking for, we knew how much money we had, and as soon as we saw it, there's a drawing somewhere, Mindy might have it, I'm not sure, I think it was a sketch that Mindy did, she might still have it. We walked up to the house and all 4 of us just knew immediately, we hadn't been through the door, we just knew immediately that was our house, it was ours, we just knew. And then in them days, estate agents gave you the key and let you go, and actually there was not there to steal, so they wouldn't have come with us anyway. So we had a key, and we went in and we claimed our rooms immediately. All of us just claimed our rooms. We knew that was our house, and we went straight to a key shop on Hesle Road and had keys cut for it. And we didn't own it, we hadn't put a deposit down or anything, but from that minute that house became ours, and we actually started working on it before it was even ours. We started decorating it and everything. How the hell we ever thought that was okay, I don't know, but we were so certain that was our house that we didn't move into it, but we did start renovating it before we'd ever put any money down or any contracts or anything. And so we actually started working on it. We also did all the conveyancing ourselves. The arrogance of youth and lesbian feminism. Why would we pay anybody to do this? We can do it ourselves. we'll get a book. We got a book, not YouTube in them days. We got a book, so we got a book, and we did all our own conveyancing. And then Mindy got cancer. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer, just at the point that happened. And so me and Alf and Saffron just decided that the house was gonna be ready for Mindy when she came out of hospital. She was going to have somewhere safe to be, and we were going to move in. So we decided really quickly that we were going to start renovating it, ready for Mindy arriving. So we just did. And again, I've got photographs. I must show you these photographs. I'm going to show you some photographs now. This was us renovating Boulevard, ready for Mindy to come home. There's quite a few.
Who took these photographs?
Probably Saffron took these, because Saffron's not in them, and Saffron was definitely Saffron was a sculptor and is a sculptor and an artist, and one of those women who can just, give her a tool and she knows exactly what to do with it. I mean, she's a real Amazon, is Saffron. She's an amazing woman. And she just said, right, well, we need to set this floor up, we need to do this, this is what we do. And we just said, tell us what to do and we'll do it. I have never wielded a bloody chisel in my life or anything like it, but this is us. And that was us taking the floor up in the downstairs living room. That's me, Saffron and Alf. And me, Alf and Joe. Joe is one of Saffron's friends. Me digging the garden. That's me and Saffron taking the floor joists out downstairs, and that's my son, bless him. And that's me kicking the ceiling down from an upstairs floor. We needed to take the ceiling down in the room below, so we took the floorboards up upstairs and kicked it down, and it was plaster and that, so it was really filthy, and that was me trying to sort out the cleaning up. You can see I'm covered in soot because it was all plaster and that. And that we just did it, and we found these two women who did electrics in Manchester, women electricians. So we got them to come and do it. That says 1982. It's probably 1981 actually. Thinking about it, 81, 82, something like that. Can't remember exactly, but Mindy will tell you because she was still in hospital then. That's why she's not in any of the photographs. But yeah, we took floors up, we replastered, we did damp proofing, did damp proofing around the bottom of the house. We replaced joists, we replaced ceilings. Never once did any of us wonder if we could do it. We just did it all ourselves. We stripped walls. When Mindy got there, Mindy's really creative. She's got such an artistic eye. She's got a lovely colour sense. She was in charge of all the decorating, so she just told us what to do. But we did it, So all of that is we just did it. We just renovated the whole place. I can't really believe it, but we did, and we never got anybody else in other than the female electricians from Manchester who came to stay with us. They did all the electrics. And everything else we did ourselves. We never got any other work people in at all.
Amazing.
And I'm astounded. I'm astounded. But really, to be honest, that was mostly Saffron, because Saffron is, she's a sculptor. She's a stonemason now, actually. And at that time, she was doing a fine arts degree and it's specialising in sculpture. So she was doing welding and handling tools, and she just knew what to do. Intuitively, she sort of knew what to do, so she pointed us in the right direction, and we did it. And it was really physical work. There was once when we'd filled a tea chest full of plaster from the ceiling, and we dragged it to the skip that we had outside, and when we went to lift it, it weighed a ton because it was absolutely full of plaster, wet plaster, and it was really, really heavy. And me and Saffron were stood there looking at it and going, oh, what the hell do we do now? Because the plaster's set, it's in this tea chest, it weighs a ton, what we're going to do? And Saffron just looked at me and she said, we can lift this. We can lift this. Bear in mind, we'd been trying for ages to lift it. And she said, we can lift this. We're Amazons. And I went, you know what? Yeah, we are. And we just bent down, we lifted it and we put it in the skip. But up until that point, up until she'd said that, we were kind of going, oh, we can't lift it, it's too heavy. So I think it was part of that, you know, women do what women can do. And we have to tell ourselves that we can do it. And sometimes we don't believe it until we tell each other that we can. And that's what we did then. We told each other that we could do it, and we did. We just did. So it was wonderful. That was wonderful. Mindy was going through a different kind of terrible time because she was in hospital. She'd had a hysterectomy. She'd had a routine cervical smear. She'll tell you this. Had found cancer cells, and she'd had a hysterectomy. And while she was in hospital, somebody had seen her kissing Saffron. A parent of one of the children that she taught had seen her kissing Saffron and reported her to the school. And while she was still being treated for cancer, the school suspended her. She was a primary teacher, and the school suspended her under investigation for being a lesbian. And I can't remember if Mindy resigned or whether she was fired. I can't remember, but she never went back. It destroyed her career. And that was entirely homophobia. So Mindy was going through all of that before she actually got to Boulevard. But by the time she got to Boulevard, she had a bedroom, and the bedroom was ready for her, and the house was ready for her, and she recovered. She physically recovered, but she never went back into a primary job because of what had happened. So, you know, that was going on at the same time. It was, yeah. So that was Boulevard. That was how Boulevard came about. It was mental. It was a mental house. Saffron was an artist, and she just wrote all over her walls and painted the walls. She knew lots of artists. So her room was just covered in graffiti and drawings and all sorts. My son loved it. And Saffron was great with my son because she taught him all about art. So he was only a child, wee small child, but he loved being with Saffron because she was really creative. But Mindy was a primary teacher, so she used to really do a lot of stuff with him, educating him, you know, playing with building blocks and that. So Bill remembers the house as a place of enormous fun and really archaic, but it was also really unsafe. The whole place, I mean, it could have fallen through the floor. There was, you know, nails everywhere. The gas was really dodgy. It was actually quite a dangerous place for Bill, and that was another reason I was so frightened that social services would get involved, because it was, you know, it just was. It was. There's a picture here I've got, and so this is us after Mindy had come out of hospital and we're having a celebratory meal, and you can see that was us in the kitchen. Again, Saffron probably took that because she's not in it. That's my son. You can see how it's nicely derelict. You know, it looks like something out of Bernardo's. Do not treat your children like this. That's Alf, who was in a chopstick phase at the time. I don't know who this is, I can't remember. That's Joe, who was helping us. This is Mindy, shortly out of hospital. Me, and my poor wee son. That's Alf's brother. But yeah, the house was derelict. It's like, do not raise your children in this kind of house.
Everyone looks very happy.
We were completely happy. It was a really happy house. Because we had this can-do, you know,
yeah.
The environment was, we can do anything. We can change the world. The world is going to change because of us, and we're going to do it, and we're going to do it here. And it was that, and it was a happy house. Saffron decided to leave after about a year because it was a collective and it was a commune, and as collectives and communes very rarely work in my experience, but for them to work there still has to be rules. It's not a free-for-all. And so we had some rules like you know, we had a cooking rota, and which is fairly straightforward, but we had this sort of rule, like if it was your turn to cook, you did a meal for us all. And Saffron just wasn't down with that at all. She didn't, it wasn't right for her. And so she decided to leave. Also, I think probably, I don't know, because it wasn't my business, and I genuinely don't know. Perhaps Sarah and Mindy were not in a good place. I'm not sure. Mindy could probably tell you more about that. They were non-monogamous as well, so there was probably some tensions around that. And anyway, Saffron decided to leave, and I think we bought her out, but I can't remember. To be honest, I can't remember. And so it was me, Mindy, and Alf then after that, and we had other women came in. One of Mindy's partners came in, Janine, for a while. She didn't last long, and then the final partner that moved in, Denny, was the one, in my opinion, that destroyed Boulevard, but that's a different story. But in the meantime, it was me, Alf and Mindy as the core, and other people moved in. We rented rooms to other people, a bit randomly, and we gave keys to just anybody that wanted them. But there was a key ceremony, you know. It was a have a key, and there was so many of them. I don't even know who the hell had keys to Boulevard. I really don't. But lots of people did, and that was great. Come and go, you know. This is our house. You can use it. The collective thing was really genuine. I mean, when I look back on it now, I had money because I was a student. I was getting a student grant by then, and you know, student grants were quite generous, and I got housing benefit during the, probably fraudulently because I actually owned the house, but I got a housing benefit during the summer months when I wasn't at uni. Alf had a job. Mindy did have a job. Can't remember what it was now. She wasn't teaching, so I can't even remember what it was. So, but Mindy was almost certainly earning more money than the rest of us, but we had one pot of money. Everything went into that one pot of money. Everything came out of that. I was spending money. My drum kit came out of that. Don't ever remember anyone saying, you can't buy a 500 quid drum kit out of our collective money. Nobody ever said that. It was just, yeah, you want a drum kit, go and get one. We've got the money in the pot. It was a proper collective community. And so there was real freedom in that. You know, I never worried about money. But you'd have to ask Mindy whether she ever worried that she was putting so much more in than the rest of us. But we owned the house equally. You know, it was... And Alf was on probably the lowest income of us all. But she was a full equal member of the house.
And there's two questions. One is your shared name.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you know how to do this collectivism? Were you learning this from other groups, or were you just inventing this? Was it off the back of feminism or an understanding, or?
It was off the back of feminism. There was we were quite influenced by the Berkeley Women's Collective. We'd heard a lot about what was happening in California. I don't know how we'd read it. You know, we were. I mean, Mindy and I by this time were voracious readers. I mean, Mindy always had been, but it was new to me. I was drinking it all up. My God, I couldn't get enough books about feminism. I was absolutely reading everything I could get my hands on. So we'd heard about all this stuff that was happening in California, and women's collectives, and how women were working together. And there was, of course, the peace movement that had already started, that was really active. But I think also we were sort of making it up. I don't remember us ever sitting down, and we just decided it was all communal, and we were all equal partners, regardless of what we brought in. We were all equal partners. This was our house. It wasn't more Mindy's or more mine. I think I'd put about $5,000 in, because that's what I'd come out of my marriage with. I think so. I was, in terms of owning the house, I owned as much as anybody else, but we never saw it like that. We genuinely didn't. It belonged to all of us. And so I think it was a combination of what we were learning from feminism, what we were learning from the Women's Centre, because the Women's Centre was a collective, Everyone had responsibility for the women's centre. So we're learning from that, and we were making it up as we went along, really. I think that was pretty remarkable when you think about it. We were just trying it on for SARS, and it worked. It worked really well for us, and it made life very happy, because none of us ever felt skint. We were never worried about money. We always seemed to have enough, and we never ran out of. And we did all the house. We got the electrics done. We bought timber, and we bought plaster, and we decorated, and we were buying furniture as well. We bought a dishwasher. Mindy found it in a junk shop. We had a dishwasher. I didn't know anybody that had a dishwasher, but we had one. It was amazing. And I never remember us being skint, so we were making it up. The Meleyal thing, it's still on the wall in the living room at Boulevard. Probably faded after years of decorating, but it is still on the wall. We decided, partly because of my experience with my own family, we didn't want to carry patriarchal surnames anymore. This was very much radical feminism in action. The names of our fathers, we were all carrying the names of our fathers, and we didn't want to carry the names of our fathers, which was not disrespectful deliberately. I wasn't dissing my dad. I love my dad. I wasn't dissing my dad, but I was dissing patriarchy, and that was a real thing. And Mindy felt the same, and Alf felt the same. To be honest, Alf felt the same about anything, because Alf wasn't very bright. She was lovely and adorable, and absolutely everybody adored Alf, but she really wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. So she didn't care. So we were trying to think of a feminist name, and I was sat on a chair in the living room one day, and I was just doodling on the wall, because it was all, we'd stripped all the walls at that point, and I was doodling on the wall, and I wrote M-E for Melinda, which was Mindy's first original name, L-E-Y for Leslie, which was part of my original name, and A-L for Alison, which was Alfie's original name. And it was Meleyal. And I went to Mindy first of all and said, "What do you think to Meleyal? Meleyal. It's our names together." And she went, "I like that. Let's talk to Alf, see what Alf thinks." And incidentally, Mindy was already known as Mindy. I was already known as Lel. And Alf had chosen Alfie. She'd been known as Alison, but she'd chosen Alfie as quite recently. But I'd always been known as Lel. It was like a family shorthand. My younger sister, when she was little, couldn't say Leslie, and so she was calling me Lely, and over time that got shortened to Lel, and everybody knew me as Lel. So I'd carried Lel for years, and it got really irritating that the only time anyone ever used Leslie was the first day at school or the first day at college. And I'd say, "No, I'm not known as Leslie, I'm known as Lel." So when we got round to changing our surname, which we did legally, we all did it by deed poll, I dropped Leslie completely. I said, "There's no point. I don't want to get qualifications in Leslie when I don't ever use it." And Mindy decided to do the same, so she's officially Mindy Meleyal, and I'm officially Lel Meleyal. Lel Francis, actually, Meleyal. And Alf became Alfie Meleyal. So it should still be written on the wall, even, it's been wallpapered many times, no doubt, after that, but somewhere in the fabric of that building is the origins of our first name. And we changed it, and after that it was really funny, because we decided to tell everybody we were sisters, and we did. We told everybody, and some in the feminist community were a bit like mocking of us about it. I remember once when we had to introduce ourselves at a meeting, and somebody said, "Oh, you've all got the same name," and we said, "Yeah, we're sisters." And one of our friends laughed, kind of snickered at us, but me, Mindy and Alf were just really clear, like we were sisters in our heart, and we're sisters in feminism, and so it was really important. And in fact, we've all kept it, we all kept that name, and in fact Mindy's wife took her name, and my son took my name as well. and that was wonderful because I never asked my son to take my surname because he had his dad's surname. I never asked him to, but literally when Bill became 18, he went and changed his name without discussing it with me. He went to a solicitor and had his name changed, and I never asked him to. It caused a bit of problems with his dad. Not that he has a relationship with his dad, but it did cause a bit of problems with his dad's side of the family. But he just like, no, I want to. So my son's a Meleyal as well. But we're the last of the only part of the land because Mindy can't have kids. Alf never had kids. My son's decided not to have children, so Meleyals, it's just
of that time.
Yeah, just of that time. But I've never regretted changing it. And when me and Kath got married, I wouldn't have considered changing it. She wouldn't have taken Man, because she's Costello and it's long family history. So she wouldn't have dreamt of taking Man, but I certainly wouldn't have dropped it either. So, yeah.
Can you talk some more then about the radical feminism that was and the politics and
yeah,
I think we've talked before about how class sort of was within that as well.
I came out into radical feminism, and the Women's Centre was radical feminist. There was quite a lot of women there involved in the peace movement who I wouldn't necessarily describe as radical feminists. There were feminists. There were two different kinds of feminism at the Women's Centre. There was quite a gentle sort of non-confrontative, Gandhi-esque kind of approach to changing the world, and then there was the kind of we need to knock down barriers, take over the world kind of. So there were two different parts of that. There was sort of socialist feminism, quite active. There was quite a few people involved in the Socialist Workers' Party. There was quite active socialist feminist women involved in the Women's Centre. And then there were lesbian feminist activists, some separatists as well. So there was quite a range of politics at the Women's Centre. There was quite a broad spectrum. And I think when we first started Boulevard, I think we probably did call ourselves separatists, which looking back on it was quite weird because we weren't really. Because like Mindy had a real close friend, Liam. My closest friend in the world was a bloke called Bill, who still is my closest friend. I had my son, of course, also Bill. We weren't actually separatists at all. But I think what we probably meant is that we were sort of influenced by separatism in that the house was utterly women-centric. And that really is important. I can't stress that enough. Women were always first in that house. Women's womanliness was first in the house. Men were welcome in so long as they understood it was our space. So there was an expectation that there would be woman friendly and nothing less than that would be allowed. So it wasn't a separatist house, although it was influenced by separatism. And I wouldn't have described it as a socialist house, though it was influenced by socialism. So it was woman centric, and it was influenced by all those different political persuasions at the Women's Centre, of which lesbian separatism was quite dominant at one point. But what we took from that, I think, was a kind of fierceness. We're here, we're queer, we're not going shopping, fuck you, mate, we're not having it, don't fuck with us. There was that kind of ballsiness to a lot of the feminism at the Women's Centre, and we had that. We were so proud of Boulevard. We were proud of ourselves. We were proud of our womanliness. We were proud of our lesbianism. It was, and it was informed by actual feminist action. Some of us were still going to demos and all the rest of it. And obviously we were going to Pride, although Pride was a very different beast then, as you know. It was a demonstration then. It was a demonstration that where we faced homophobia all the time. It was not, oh, aren't we all wonderful, let's bring our kids on this picnic. It wasn't like that then at all. So we're still doing that. And then of course we started going to Greenham, and Greenham was influential in all the ways it was influential, non-direct, aggressive direct actions, and all of that influenced the politics at Boulevard. There was, for me, maybe Mindy, I don't know, you'll have to ask her about this. I've never discussed this with Mindy, so I don't know. I'd like to have a discussion with Mindy about some of this. For me, there was also a realisation that it was quite exclusive. It was dainty feminism, even Greenham. Where were the working class women? Where were the women who couldn't afford to go to Greenham because they had no fucking money to go to Greenham? Where were they? Where were the women that couldn't afford to be vegetarian because all they could afford was scrag end? Where were they lived on corned beef because that was the best way to feed the families? Where were them women? There was an absence of Esler Road women in all of this. And as I got more educated, I started to notice that. And there was one woman called Sue at the Women's Centre, and she was what they call anarchist, collectivist, I can't remember, radical, what they call them. She was an anarchist anyway. And she was always angry, fist waving. And she had absolutely no idea about working class women's reality. Absolutely no idea whatsoever. Why aren't these women getting out on the street? Well, actually, they've got 7 kids. They haven't got a brass bean to scratch their ass with. How are they supposed to get out on the street? How are they supposed to feed the kids if they do that? You've no idea. And I started to become really aware of that at Boulevard. And I think I might have mentioned this to you before. There was one situation where I was with a group of old friends, and a couple of them in that group were dykes, and they were old school dykes, and one of them was being quite racist, and I became aware that, I was aware because I'd been in feminist circles, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to handle it, because if I started challenging her like my middle class friends would have done, then what would she have thought of me? Like, oh, the fuck are you? Where have you come from? What's going on here? I started to feel alienated from my own culture, my own people on Esler Road. And the more I became educated, both formally and informally, I started to realise that there was that I was disjointed. I was not completely I wasn't a part of the middle class community, because I still didn't know so much. I didn't understand about middle class lives. I was like a fish out of water in around some of the feminists who were really posh, middle class actually. But I was a fish out of water amongst my own people as well, and that was quite a difficult place for me. And I never discussed it with Mindy, because I worshipped Mindy, I adored Mindy, she was my hero, and I didn't want to alienate her by saying, hang on a minute, I'm a bit lost here. I didn't want to alienate her I didn't want her to think less of me, so I never discussed it with her at the time. And it's only, now looking back, I can think about some of that stuff that was going on there. So when we started to get, and it was Mindy who said, it was Mindy's idea, but again, you think about the perspective, where it came from. We became aware through a friend of ours, Sandy, who I think you're going to talk to, that there was this whole group of other women that we didn't have any connection with that were quite close to us geographically. And Mindy said, oh, you know, they don't even know about the Women's Centre. They don't even know it's there. You know, we should tell them that the Women's Centre's there. And I'm sure, you know, they'd really want to know about this stuff if they knew it was there. I mean, it's ridiculous that there's this divide amongst us, and we should really do something about that. So let's go and tell them. It really was like that. And I was quite excited to do that, but I was also quite scared because I just thought, oh God, I'm going to be discovered as a fraud now. You know, I was going to get shown up. Let's go. Well, the obvious thing to do is like go to where they are, she said. And that was the St. George's. And what an absolute fucking eye-opener that was. Anyway.
So why?
Oh
so
my
why?
God, oh my God. I remember going in to that place, and we also went into subsequently went into some nightclubs in like some of the dodgy nightclubs like Vicky Coffee Club and places like that. Through Sandy, it was a complete rogue, by the way. I was having a total laugh taking us to those places. But we went in the St. George's, and it was so rough and so unashamedly saucy queer, misogynistic, without bad intent. You know, like you'd have men shouting over the bar, "What do you cunts want?" But there was no malice in it. Do you know what I mean? They weren't attacking us. That was how they spoke. And I remember really well, I don't know what Mindy's reflection on this. I remember Mindy sat there with a face like a slapped ass. What? Oh my God! It was that kind of face. And I'm thinking, oh God, oh God, oh God, because I saw my people, I was in my people, and I didn't know how to behave. I didn't know whether to join them or whether I was going to be rejected by them. I was genuinely frightened to be in that environment because I felt so exposed, because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to behave, but I knew that that was where I belonged, that these were my people, these were the people I'd grown up with. And like there were women, there was one woman called Leslie who was with a woman called Mandy. And Mandy was handsome, butch type, really handsome, gorgeous. I fancied her actually. Wouldn't look twice at me because she thought I was fucking weird. Because she said, she said to me, you know, are you a butcher or a femme? And I said, oh, you know, we reject these patriarchal labels. I remember saying something like that. Oh, you know, I'm just a woman. And she went, yeah, but are you a butcher or a femme? You're fucking weird, Joe. And you know, we were all dressed in like rainbow colours and dungarees and Doc Martens and all the rest of it. Monkey boots for me because I couldn't get Doc Martens fixed. I've got tiny feet. And I remember saying to Leslie something about being a lesbian, and she went, I am not a lesbian. And she was really angry with me, and I went, but I thought we were Mandy. Well, I am, but I'm not a fucking lesbian. Don't you dare call me a lesbian. And then, of course, Mindy was like trying to educate her about, but you are though, aren't you? And I was like, Mindy, shut up, you're going to get your head kicked in. Just stop. Just shush, Mindy, just stop. And Leslie was genuinely really affronted that anyone would call her a lesbian because it was situational for her. She was with a woman, but she wasn't a lesbian. That's not how she identified. And Mindy wasn't getting that, so she was trying to tell Leslie why she was a lesbian.
And what was she thinking she was? How would she have described
Mindy
herself?
would have described her as a lesbian, it's obvious.
No, but how would Leslie have described herself?
That she was a straight woman that happened to be seeing Mandy. That she was just with Mandy for as long as she was with Mandy. That was... And in fact, they had a house down Northern Avenue. They were living together, you know, they had a little toe down. It was Woodcock Street actually, not Orton Ave. So they were as good as married, but that's not how... That wasn't Leslie's identity, and we were imposing that on her as women coming in, but not how she accepted it. And then, and this was the pièce de résistance. I cannot even begin to tell you what happened. It was amazing. Ray, who was calling himself Candidly Barry at the time, I think he changed his name subsequently to something else.
Yeah.
Bobby Mandrell, yeah. So I think he was Candy at the time. And he came on and he did his thing. And it was bordering on saucy and offensive at times, and it could be racist, and it could be a bit sexist. Well, it was sexist, and it could be a bit racist. And it was hilarious. It was hilarious. And I didn't know whether to laugh. Alfie was laughing like a drain. It's like I said, Alfie want the sharpest knife in the drawer. She was just loving it. I honestly, you'd have to ask Mindy what she was actually politically thinking, but I know she was having a ball. We were all having a really good time. But then he did his pièce de résistance, his two pièces de résistances. I don't know how you say that. The first was his Union Jack thing, where he came out and did he came out with the Union Jack and did like They'll Always Be in England, and all this. I mean, Christ, we're involved in the women's peace movement. We were going to Greenham, and there's him doing this kind of like They'll Always Be in England, the great big Union Jack. And then he got us all to stand on the seats. We all got up and did all this. And honestly, I wanted to run away. I didn't know how to behave in front of my friends, and there weren't just Mindy and Alf there. There were other people there with us. And I didn't know how to behave. I didn't know whether to join in or whether not to join in. I wanted to join in. It was fantastic. The whole pub was rioting. It was brilliant. Everyone was up. Everyone was having a great time. And I didn't know how to be. And I don't know that Mindy knew how to be either. I think she must have felt as compromised as I did, but for a slightly different reason, I think. You'd have to ask her. Mine was about class. It was absolutely about class. And I don't know I don't know how Mindy experienced it, but I was aware she was having an experience that was different to mine. And she inevitably was enjoying it because she couldn't not. It was amazing. But she must have felt incredibly compromised as well in front of other people that we were there with. I certainly did, but like I say, probably for different reasons to Mindy. And then he got up and he did his thing where he stripped off, and he did coming back to, the Charles Aznavour number, I think, What Makes a Man a Man. And it was beautiful. Oh my God, I'll never forget it. And I've seen it many times, obviously, subsequently. And it was beautiful, and it was moving, and it was just wonderful. I don't know whether that was something he thought of himself, but he always ended his act with it, and it was really special. And when he took all his makeup off and he was just stood there, it was absolutely amazing. So all of that happened, and we were like, what the fuck just happened? We'd gone there to teach these women something about the Hull Women's Centre. Fucking hell. And we've just been a part of this phenomenon. And we went again another time, and we went with a couple of women, Nicola and Carol. And Nicola and Carol were lesbian feminist separatists. More Nicola than... Nicola's a famous writer now. She's in America. She's a famous writer. She's very educated, very learned. She was very posh. Carol was perhaps a bit more working class. I'm not sure. Still quite posh, but they came with us once, and they despised it. Nicola could not keep it off her face that she despised everything about it. And Clarice came over to her and said, don't ever come in my fucking pub again. Like she'd seen it. But again, you see, like I experienced that really acutely. Bear in mind now, I'm in my 60s now, I'd go, what the fuck. But then I was in my 20s, and it really, I was still learning how to behave. I didn't know how to be. And I was ashamed of the St George's in front of Nicola, who I was really intimidated by, and I was ashamed of Nicola for her poor-faced disparaging of this entirely amazing community, because I was really angry with her for being so fucking dismissive of all of these people and for the culture. But I was also angry at my culture for being so hard on Nicola for not understanding where she was coming from. So that I feel like I was walking that tension the whole time. But we met so many women in the St George's from Hessel Road, the Hessel Road Butch Femme community, who became friends of Boulevard. I mean, they became regular visitors. Many of them were working women, and some of them were pimps as well, working the women. Completely understand that was also, problematic for us. And I'm not quite, looking back on it now, I'm not quite sure how we accommodated that. I'm really not sure how we were okay with that. I don't think we ever were okay with it, but we somehow accepted, like, that was what they did. They worked these women, and these women were okay with it, and if they were okay with it, what business did we have not being okay with it? So we just sort of accommodated it, even though politically we absolutely wouldn't accommodate some women pimping off other women, but we did, and they were our friends as well. I don't know if we ever rationalise that. I'm not sure. Again, I've not spoken to Mindy about that, but I just think we did know women that were pimping other women, and they were visitors at Boulevard. Why were we okay with that, really? Because politically it's completely not okay. It wouldn't be then, it isn't now. But they were still friends of Boulevard. Don't think any of them had keys though. Not sure. Actually, one of them did, yeah. So it was that class divide really showed itself at Boulevard. But it was a welcoming home to many women. Pammy loved coming there. She spent a lot of time with us. You have to ask Sandy about Pammy. Pammy and Sandy were partners for a while, and Pammy was tough. She was one of the hardest women working Castle Street. I remember once she turned up at our house and she had the tiniest little red miniskirt on, a red and white striped top, high heels, and it was absolutely freezing outside. It was snowing, it was freezing. I'm like, Pam, you're going to catch your death. And she said, oh, the fucking punters have got to know what they're getting. Like, just going out to work on the street dressed like that, it's incredible. Really tough woman. And she was a regular visitor at Boulevard. I used to babysit her kids, a child rather, Jodie, and Angie, and Weena and Wendy. They were partners at the time. They were regular visitors. There was another dyke across the road, Joyce, who lived near Weena and Wendy. She was a regular. She had a key, I think. Joyce. Regular visitors. They were completely a part of our community. No, they weren't separate. They weren't distant. But that was the divide. They didn't fit with the Springbank women. They weren't a part of the same community at all. So we crossed a line there. We crossed a boundary, and I think that was geography. Possibly I had more to do with that than I believed I did at the time. Maybe, I don't know. But also Mindy was really interested in people. She still is. She enjoyed people, and she was curious, and she was very friendly. So she was a part of that, and Alf was a part of it, because absolutely everyone adored Alf. Everyone. She was just one of them people. Everybody adored Alf. And yes, she was naive, and she wasn't bright at all, but everybody adored her. And so it didn't matter who they were. I mean, so many of the butchers from Hessel Road absolutely fell for Alf. And Alf was like, oh, the fancies me. But she was never interested in them, because they were her type. But lots did fancy Alf. They just fell for her. So I think all three of us in different ways contributed to that boundary changing, and Boulevard was really a part of that. So if you ever got to talk to some of the butch femmes on Hesler Road, they would remember Boulevard. I definitely think they would, because they thought we were weird. They didn't understand why we didn't accept butch femme. They thought all the feminism crap was rubbish. They thought we were strange, but they liked to come into the house.
I would say that they have said all of those things.
Ah, that's
but
nice.
Very celebratory of it. Could you speak some more about the butch femme working class?
Well, the butch femme working class thing, there was. I always knew there was a community, a working class butch femme community, from very young, because of course I saw butches, more butches than femmes, as a kid growing up on Hesler Road. There was a butch woman or girl who was the same age as me, Sandy, and she used to say when we were kids that she was a boy. She was a boy. She was a boy. She knew she was a boy. She was always a boy. So I wasn't unfamiliar with butches. I wasn't so much familiar with femmes at the time when I was growing up. So I always knew that there was that community there, but I didn't know anything about it when I got older. So I think I said to you that when I knew I was different, I didn't really know how I was different. I didn't have any words to explain that, and it certainly didn't occur to me that I was lesbian, although I knew I liked girls. It's very ephemeral. It's not even saying I liked girls. It wasn't exactly that. It was I'd get crushes on people that I saw. So I knew that these people existed because I'd seen them, but I wasn't going into pubs, you know. Bear in mind I got married when I was 18, so up until that point I'd been in one pub in my life when I got married. I'd only ever been in one pub, so I didn't see that culture, I didn't see that subculture. And then I got involved in lesbian feminism, which, you know, I can see in my head the dykes, that photograph I showed you, you know, that's kind of what women look like. It was different to the girls that I'd been growing up with. So when I met the butch femmes of Hesler Road, what they looked like to me was the butches looked like young fishermen, like I'd seen growing up on Hesler Road, quite sharp suited mostly, quite tough, quite swaggery, and their girlfriends looked like girls, very feminine, makeup, you know, heels, as girly as any girls I'd ever grown up with. And the butches looked like young men almost exclusively. They were like a Levi's ad. They were like an ad for the tailors of Hesler Road, that, you know, quite wide Oxford bag trousers, often double-breasted jackets, suits and ties. That was them. And then there was a different group of men that were the old queens, and they were kind of different, quite sort of fair and quite often sort of pot-bellied drinkers, a lot of them. And they were like, oh, get you, you know, all that kind of, not quite Polari, but not far removed from Polari. Oh, she's such a bitch. There was that group as well, and I think I was a bit more familiar with them from Hesler Road, because that group of men were quite visible on Hesler Road. You know, you'd hear them in Jackson's, you know. Oh, I'll have one of them cakes, look lovely, darling. Do you know what I mean? They were much more visible. We all knew one of them. And I think there was something about, you know, the TV stars at the time, the gay comedians, the Dick Emerys and that sort of gave the old queens a visibility that was semi-acceptable as long as they didn't flaunt it. Do you know what I mean? So that there was them, and then there was these handsome butch dykes who looked like young fishermen, young lads who might be deculaners or something. That was the look that they had about them. Rainers would be a perfect place for them, and probably was, and Derricoats, of course, because a lot of them went in Derricoats. And that was the group that I met through going to the St George's, and I didn't even know. And of course, St George's had become that because Clarice's son was gay, and so he was kind of the old Queenie type, Clarice's son. So he sort of brought that group in, and as you probably know, like the area where Ray performed was a tiny little stage. It was half the size of that sofa. It wasn't a big room. It was rammed, but it still managed to get loads of people in, and that was where we met the Butches, and that was where we met their girlfriends. I don't know that many of them identified as femmes or lesbians. Certainly Leslie didn't, but I didn't really speak to any of the others about their sexuality. And we were at the pub on a Friday night getting pissed. So that's all I can tell you about the butch femmes, really. I did know some butch dykes, but we didn't call them that then. Lesies, we would have called them. I knew some lesies who were my sort of age group, vaguely through like other social networks. I knew a couple of women that I knew were lesies, but I didn't have any kind of real relationship with them.
And what was it about? Why do you think there was this very stark male-female presentation within that? Because I'm guessing that wasn't what you were seeing in the HU5 groups. So what do you think, what is it about that particular presentation of that group, that area? What?
I think it was learned. I think I think we sort of learn how to be from our environment, don't we? And I think perhaps some of the butches, they knew what there wasn't. They weren't high heels and skirts and tights or stockings and makeup. They knew they weren't that. And so I think that then what that meant is that they had to be that. And at the time, that was, the young fishermen, that was, as you know, on Nesle Road, like the fishermen had kudos, and the young lads who were just coming up, looking to earn their own ticket, they had kudos as well, and they had money. And so I think some of the butchers, although they didn't go to see that if they weren't that femme, then there must have been that. So I think it was an aspirational thing. And I think the girls, I don't know, but the girls and young women, they also were what they were in the community. There were the girls and young women in the community who happened to be going out with the equivalent of a deculaner or something that wasn't a deculaner actually. So I think it was environmental, and that's what's there. Like Icelandic people don't eat veg because there isn't any. They eat fish because that's what there is. And I think that was probably where the butch femme community, what it was, and they all knew each other, because in Nesle Road everybody knew each other, so they knew each other as well. And I suppose, like, Mandy was much younger than Izzy, but they kind of gravitated towards each other, and I just wonder if Mandy saw Izzy as a bit of a sort of role model. And I think that's how some of them ended up as pimps as well, because there weren't job opportunities necessarily for them either. But what there was, Elder Grey and Castle Street, and I guess that was because quite a few of them were pimps actually. So a lot of the butchers that went round St George's, there was probably demographically a larger proportion of pimps that went in there than butch dyke pimps that were anywhere else, I suspect, because we knew a few of them. Hi darling. And I guess like some of my own discomfort was that I knew I wasn't that. I didn't know why I wasn't that, but that was something about. When I said about knowing from really young I was different, I had this thirst for knowing that I couldn't have explained then. But I knew I wasn't that. I wanted something else, and it wasn't that. And when I found lesbian feminism, I knew that was on the right lines. I knew that it was educated, I suppose, and so I wanted that. I didn't want that. That seemed to be really fixed in my mum and dad, my mum and dad's environment. Because when I was young, I knew I didn't want my mum and dad's environment either, because it didn't. Like I said, my dad aspired to a council house, and I'm not knocking my dad for that. That was what he aspired to, but I knew there had to be more to life than that. So when I saw lesbian feminism, I thought, oh, they see that there's more to life than that, than a council house. So I want some of that. Whereas the butch femme crowd seemed to aspire to council houses, so I want a part of that. And that all sounds incredibly kind of like patronising, but I'm trying to kind of speak now what was really unspeakable at the time, because I didn't know how to articulate it, so being a bit clumsy with it like that.
Do you think there's also something about safety and acceptance?
Yeah, I definitely do, because Rayners is and was even more so then. You know, it was a tough place, Rayners. I mean, even the Bobbers and Dockers didn't sit together. You know, it was a tough place. But women, the butch dykes there found a safe haven there. And I suppose that was like also other people possibly saying, I don't know who you are, and you're peculiar, but you look like some of the young lads that I work with, and therefore you're probably all right. Yeah, you're of us. And through your dress, you're showing that you're of us. The sharp suits and the stuff, you're showing that you're of us. Don't get me wrong. I mean, like there was still, even the sharp suits, you know, sometimes were very worn. There was still quite a lot of poverty, and I guess people recognise that as well. You're doing your best to look sharp, even though the suit's a bit worn or the elbows are gone or whatever, because we recognise that as well. I think that was happening for them. I think there was an acceptance there. And the great thing about the St George's was really safe, unless you crossed Clarice, and then it wasn't at all, because she could be an absolute monster. But it was really safe, and it was safe for everybody, and it was even safe for us, but not safe for those who came snooping, like looking down the nose. Like Nicola did look down the nose, and Clarice told her that she wasn't welcome anymore, because she did sit there in judgment. She did judge, and she was being judgmental, and I really feared that. You know, I really, that was that boundary all the time. I was really scared of, which is funny now when I look back on it, because 60 odd years of self-confidence, I can't even imagine being so intimidated by everyone, but I was then. But I loved the St George's. Oh my God, I loved the St George's. And then Sandy took us to Vicky Coffee Club, and there was a club at the bottom of Holderness Road, Hedon Road, can't remember. Real dodgy club. You had to go down in a basement. Loads of the working girls went there, and that was a revelation. There was all kinds of people there. There were the butch femmes, the sexual deviants, and I use that
women,
phrase like
all women.
No, it wasn't all women. It was mixed, but there were people looking for, there were punters looking for prostitutes. There were fishermen. There were fishermen coming in from abroad. There were druggies. It was a really dodgy sort of place. It was a really, really dodgy place, and Sandy took us there. And I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. It was great. There were people there, you know, in very little clothing. There were people there in bondage clothing. There were butchers that I'd never met before. There were pimps, there were prostitutes. There was absolutely every collection of society in that club, and it just felt really safe. You know, it felt. I mean, it was a bit like a precursor to Sill, because Sill had that kind of anything goes. We're all okay. And I suppose that was a precursor to queer, really, in a political sense. But that was as queer as I've ever been in that dingy nightclub in the basement that Sandy took us to. She'll tell you the name of it. It was quite famous, I think. That was like anything goes in here. Anything goes, and you have to be a part of that. And I think St George's was all a part of that. And the St George's crowd, a lot of them went there as well, because so there was all these like connections. We were not the right people to be in there, or like the feminist group was not the right people to be in there, but we found a safety in it as well, because anything went, and we had to just put our fucking snootiness at the door, because otherwise we'd have got our head kicked in. So yeah.
So we have, I think, to talk more about this idea of acceptance within class. So can you talk about the difference between, because Polar Bear and HU5, and then this sort of St George's, Never the Twains Shall Meet, or the Crossing of the Divides or something. And I think there's a danger that we think of HU3 and those things as accepting of everybody. Or was it? It wasn't, was it?
It wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. No, it really wasn't. It was very... It's funny, you know, the stuff that was going on around the Polar Bear was very particular. It was very particular
say
about
what that is.
It was sort of behavioural. You had to be seen to behave like a good feminist. Oh, I want to have again now. And there seemed to be really clear rules about what a good feminist was, and I wasn't completely sure what the rules were. But I knew I got it wrong a lot. And I remember getting told off several times. Oh God, I remember once, and this was way back, like this is at the beginning of my feminist career. I remember I made some kind of jokey comment. I'm mortified to tell you this, but it is a real thing.
Yeah.
I made some kind of jokey comment about rape. And Mindy had such a go at me, and I thought I would die of shame. Because I, A, had been told off, and B, I had no idea why I'd been told off. I genuinely didn't understand. And I'd said something like, oh God, you know, it's not like I want to be raped or something. You know, I'd said something like that because I didn't know any better. But what I very clearly understood is that was a boundary I must never cross again. It was like, it was not permitted, and I needed to find out ASAP why it wasn't permitted. And then there was another occasion with Anarchist Sue, where, and this is honest to God the truth, so the women's centre, the first women's centre, was regularly attacked by the locals, you know, because it was full of lesbies. And on this one particular occasion, the front door had a padlock, and they'd superglued the padlock, and they'd set fire to the door. And the door was on fire, literally. And we'd had to ring the fire brigade, and we were locked in. We couldn't get out the building, and they'd set fire to the fucking door. And so we're in the first room of the women's centre was like a workshop where they used to do carpentry, of course they did, carpentry workshops. And we're getting like the saws and hammers to try and get the door open, which was they'd padlocked from the outside. And I said to Sue, the fucking mongrels! And she stood there and gave me this massive lecture about why I was a fascist for calling these working class people mongrels. The door was on fire. They'd locked us in. We were going to die. And she was stood there lecturing me about calling working class people outside uneducated, what she called uneducated working class people who didn't know any better. It was fascist of me to call them mongrels. And again, I remembered thinking, you're a fucking idiot. You know, they're trying to kill us and you're a fucking idiot and you're telling me off about calling mongrels. But again, I really understood that I'd crossed a boundary and that was to do with my lack of education, and I needed to understand why. But that there were rules. There were absolute rules about how we behaved as feminists and how we didn't behave. And I didn't understand any of that because I wasn't educated. And I guess that's the thing, like I really quickly started to realise that I had to become educated because all the middle class people seemed to be educated. There were nurses and teachers, and I think nurses, teachers and social workers almost exclusively. So they'd all been to college, they'd all had that. They hadn't left school at 15 like I had. Well, I actually checked out about 14 really. I very rarely went after that. And all of that meant that there were these really strict rules, and there were rules that I just hadn't grown up with and I didn't understand, and I didn't understand the rules. And of course, the butch femme side of things, or the working class community that I grew up with, there were different sets of rules that I had grown up with that were different. So it was just that really. It was that was the class, the real class difference, the wall that I came up against. And I'm sure I wasn't the only one. But what I didn't understand is how many of them seemed to know the rules and I didn't. And I was always making faux pas. And actually, it was Mindy who said to me, and I'll always be grateful to her for this. She said to me, "You need to be educated. You need to get educated." And I decided that I would. And, you know, I've been doing that ever since.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a doctor, I've got a doctorate, I've got 2 master's degrees, I have a teaching qualification, I have a degree and a qualification in social work. I've never stopped since then. And that was entirely down to Mindy saying, you need to get educated. So I am great, you know, I'm really grateful to that community. I'm really, really grateful to the community for nudging me in the right direction, but it was tough. It was really tough.
And so at Polar Bear, this was where it was almost, it's funny because it's on that corner, isn't it? It's on the divide between Docklands and HU5, and so this particular venue, pub, do you want to...
The Polar Bear was really important, as you probably have already been told to some extent. The Polar Bear was split into 2 halves. It wasn't physically, you just walked in through the door and there was this great big U-shaped bar, and all the kind of locals stayed at one end playing dominoes, and all the sort of lefty alternatives went to the right side where there was like little cubicles, and that's where all the dykes used to meet up regularly, pre-silhouette usually, but also from the women's centre. The women's centre was in the road just across the road, the first women's centre, and after the meetings went down to the Polar Bear. And in fact, when we first started going to the Polar Bear, they wouldn't serve us pints. It is, we could only buy halves in there. They would not serve any of us pints, which was really funny. And they weren't happy about serving us bitter either, which is also funny. You know, when you think back now, you can't believe that actually happened. But yeah, it is true. It is true. They wouldn't serve us pints when we first started going in.
And you would have had it in a lady's glass as well.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely a lady's glass, none of the tankards, definitely. So I think Polar Bear, I don't know whether it was kind of a semi-alternative venue before the women from the Women's Centre started occupying it. I don't know if it was, but certainly from when the Women's Centre started, Polar Bear was the go-to place, and that was where we all ended up going. And of course there was also quite a vibrant alternative scene in the Springbank area. So like there was a community centre down at the bottom of one of the streets off Springbank, I can't remember, and that was a venue for bands and stuff. So it might be that there was already Polar Bear was already a meeting place for alternatives, but it certainly became the place where all the lesbian feminist dykes hung out. And when I say lesbian feminist nights, like it was all the women that fit with the women's centre crowd, and some of those women didn't go to the women's centre, and they didn't. I don't even know if they would describe themselves as educated, but I would lay money that most of them call themselves feminists or of feminist sympathies, because I can think of a few women that I knew that I used to meet there regularly that completely fit with that crowd. Maybe they were just a bit alternative, they were queer or they were lesbian and they were a bit alternative but not necessarily politically active, but they were definitely a part of that crowd, and then that became part of the Silhouette crowd, of course, and both Silhouettes. But we never saw any of the Hessel Road Dykes there. Never, not once. And we invited them there, and they never came. You know, we said, "Oh, we come to your pub. Why don't you come to ours?" And they never came.
Why do you think?
Just want their place, and also, of course, the other thing is, it's actually quite difficult to get to, because if you think about Hessel Road and even Anlaby Road, then there's quite a walk. You know, you either have to go into town and out again if you're going to get bus, or it's actually a long walk to get from Hessel Road to Springbank. So I think it was just that, but of course we all had bikes. Of course we did, you know, because we're all kind of trendy lefties, so we all had bikes. And we used to go clubbing on our bikes.
Yeah.
And I think that's why. I think it was just geography. I don't think it was political will. I think it was just geography.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, you were talking then about the people that were in Polar Bear, so the, you know, locals and the Dominoes, and you as women. Could you say some more about who might have been in St George's? So you've talked about the kind of butch femmes and the saucy queens and Ray.
Yeah, there's lovely Ray. Ray was always absolutely adorable as a human being. He was always a lovely man, always really warm and friendly, and just really had a lot of warmth to Ray. So there was a group of men that were around Clarice's son, and I honestly don't know whether they were gay or straight. There was always a little group. Bear in mind the room wasn't very big. It was actually quite small. There was always a group of men who looked slightly dodgy, possibly old fishermen, older men. Bear in mind, you know, our group tended to be around the 20s and 30s. So these, when I say older men, they were probably men in the 40s, 50s, possibly 60s. They looked like old fisherman types. Never were any women with them. Never. And then there was the butch femme lot. So I would say that there were, and then Clarice always had a little group of friends there. She always had a table reserved for one of her little groups. It was just to drink Baileys, I remember. So there were. It wasn't a really diverse group. There were people there to see Ray, but mostly I think there were Hessel Road queers. There was quite a few men who were associated with the old Alex and the other one,
Vauxhall.
The Vox and Alex. So there was a group of quite flamboyant sort of gay men that were involved with both of those places, and they used to come down to St George's. I suspect they might have been the publicans as well, because they knew Clarice. Don't know. So there was a really small group of, who I think was straight men, older men, pants-willing kind of fishermen types, probably quite local, and the rest all seemed to be a part of the queer community, as we would call them now, in an extended sort of way.
And do you think it was known as a safe space?
Yes, and I think that was Clarice, because Clarice wouldn't have a bar of anybody that caused any trouble, according to what Clarice meant by trouble, was out, and nobody crossed her. She was a fierce woman, was Clarice. You were a bit scared of Clarice, because if she took against you, you were in trouble. You weren't welcome. and she was known to be a bit erratic with who she barred. But I think it was sort of a safe place, yeah.
And you've mentioned Vauxhall and the Alex, would they be places that you as women would have gone to?
Yeah, we did. We went to, loved Alex when it had the club there. Oh my God, we absolutely loved it there. I absolutely loved it. Felt totally safe there. Danced my socks off there. Loved it. Vox was like a pre-club place, and we only ever went there if we were going to go to the Alex. We didn't go there at any other time, and that was always a bit. It was a little bit of a different vibe. Bear in mind, Alex and Vox was later. This was after Boulevard, after Boulevard had ended, and we'd all moved on a bit. I only ever went to the Vox pre-Alex. It was only a club night, and I didn't feel particularly comfortable there. I didn't feel like it was. I felt like it was a men's place, really, not a women's place. And they let us in, but I don't think we were particularly welcome there. Whereas Alex, it just felt like anybody was welcome. If we were buying beer, we were welcome.
Yeah. And when you say men's space, do you think it was people talk about it being very a male gay space?
Yeah, it was. It really was. And it was the old Esel Road queens, really. You know, the old pot-bellied queens. It was them. It was all, oh, she's a bitch. Oh, I'm not talking to her. It was all that. But you know, that's. I'm not knocking it. That was part of the community. But there was, again, you know, as a kind of feminist, there's an ear to that. You hear it, and you know, it's very much part of the culture. Oh, she's this, she's that. And you think, okay. You hear it with a different ear, perhaps, if you're a feminist. Well, I certainly did. Yeah.
And then I was going to ask you, so can you talk some more about how the end of Boulevard, or what happened after Boulevard in your life? What did you do at that point?
Boulevard ended disastrously. I've never spoken to Mindy about this, and it'd be interesting to hear what her take will be on it.
Sex, she's already told.
Yeah. Mindy got together with somebody who was really troubled, and Alf and I knew that she was not just troubled but trouble, and she made us really uncomfortable. And I think she was probably really possessive of Mindy. I think she was a control freak. I think she was damaged. I think she was dangerous, and she definitely marginalised us from Mindy. She separated us from Mindy and made me and Alf feel really unsafe. We hated being there. I didn't want to be there. And then at one point she attacked me, and funnily enough, she attacked me for some wrongdoing that she imagined that I'd done, and I really hadn't. She thought I'd been snooping in the stuff, and I really hadn't. I genuinely, with hand on heart, had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. But she attacked me. She physically attacked me, and we'd been trying to tell Mindy for quite a long time that we thought this woman was dangerous, and subsequently we were proved absolutely right about that. But then later on, it was years later, and I'd said to Alf about, you know, fucking psycho, she fucking attacked me for snooping in the stuff, and Alf said, oh no, that was me. Oh, thanks for that, Alf. Thanks for that. Yeah. She was, oh no, it was me. I just wanted to know what she was doing. No, like, right, thanks for that, Alf. Thanks for that. But yeah, it was all to do with that, and Mindy went on to have a really difficult time with that woman. Really difficult time. And then subsequently we found out stuff about that woman's past that made clear that man and Alf's intuition was absolutely right. But poor Mindy, she found out personally that our intuition had been right, and she had a very, very difficult time, which, you know, she'll tell you more about. It's not mine to tell. But the problem with that is, and I'll always adore Mindy. Mindy is an incredibly important person in my life, and I love her. but trust was really damaged. You know, we never found a way back to... Me, Alf and Mindy, I used to have this recurring nightmare when I lived in Boulevard that this very much influenced by old films, so just bear that in mind, that we were surrounded by Red Indians, and I do say that with inverted commas, and I could only save 3 people, and my son was there. Who did I save? And I'd wake up terrified from this nightmare, and that was a recurring nightmare, because in the dream I didn't know who I would save. That's how close me and Alf and Mindy were. We were absolutely so close that in that nightmare I worried that I wouldn't save my son because I'd saved them. That was a nightmare. I adored Mindy, but she chose Denny over me and Alf, and intellectually I could get over that, but in my heart I couldn't get over it, and neither could Alf. And so our relationship was really badly damaged, and Mindy knows that, and Alf knew that, and we eventually found ways to be able to be all right with each other and to be respectful of each other. And I'll always love Mindy, and I'll always be grateful to her. But our relationship sort of imploded, and it's never been the same since. And Boulevard came crashing down. I left as soon as I was attacked. I left, and I never went back. And I got a house, a 2-bedroomed house, and Alf came and lived with me there. And then we sold our shares in the house to Mindy for £1,000 each, just £1,000. You know, like we virtually gave her it. Regret that, because I know she sold it for a lot more money than that. But we just wanted rid. We just wanted to be out of it. We never wanted to have anything to do with it again. And then poor Angie, Denny got Angie out as well after that, and Denny made Angie's life a misery until Mindy and Denny were just isolated, basically. And then Mindy went through hell with Denny. I know this through history. I didn't know it personally. And then people supported Denny, not Mindy, and was trying to say, oh, domestic violence, it's a two-way thing. And it wasn't. Mindy would never lie about stuff like that. And then Mindy sold Boulevard, and that was the end of that. So, but what I would say is I have talked to Mindy about this subsequently, and I think we almost needed it to crash and burn.
It had to.
Yeah, there's something about, I don't know about the others, but I think I needed to fly after that. I needed to become, there's a real sense that, for me anyway, and I have said this to Mindy, that I needed Boulevard to end in order to go on to become. So I'd take some responsibility for the crashing and burning. I could have done more. I could have talked to Mindy. I could have tried to manage the Denny situation, and I didn't. It was just like, right, fuck this. I'm not having this anymore. I'm not being a part of this. But it was an inglorious end to a glorious place, and that was such a shame. It was such a shame, and it was a shame that our relationships were damaged. Me and Alf carried on being close. Like me and Alf turned to each other really, and we shared for quite a long time after that, shared housing. But Mindy we didn't have anything much to do with for probably another 2 years, and then after that her life crumbled in the context of a partnership at the time, and she then had to rebuild her life after that, which she did really successfully, and that included a move to Manchester and getting together with Linda. So it was awful. It was awful for Mindy, it was awful for me, it was awful for Alf. It was a surprise to some of the women that we knew. And poor Boulevard, you know, that was left behind. And do you know what was really sad about that is the hallway was massive because it was this big Edwardian house. So we decorated the hallway with stuff that was important to us, and Saffron had been in charge of that, so she was like keeper of the walls, we used to call it. She was keeper of the walls. So we had this little place where we'd put stuff that we wanted to go on the walls, and then when Saffron had enough she'd paste it up, and So all the way up the staircase there was all this stuff, and there was loads of Bill's paint drawings that he'd done, and they were all at Bill's height, so they were at proper height for Bill. But there was Mindy's Decree Nisi, there was my Decree Nisi, all pasted to the walls of Boulevard. There were photographs, you know, there was posters from events we'd been to, there were ticket stubs, there was all kinds of stuff all the way up the walls on Boulevard, a proper history. And of course all that was left behind. And then many years later, probably it was before me and Cass got together, so it's more than 23 years ago, I contacted the people who lived in Boulevard, and I said, is there anything left at all that I could, and they said no, it's all been, everything was stripped, it's all gone. So I never got to take any photographs or anything, but there was loads of stuff on those walls, including the most stunning picture of Annie Lennox at the top of the stairwell. So when you walked up, you had this glorious picture of Annie Lennox just looking down at you. It was absolutely wonderful, a massive big life-size poster. But there was all kinds of stuff on that wall that we posted up. I regret losing all that. There was all Bill's drawings and loads of stuff. But yeah, that was the end of Boulevard.
But like you say, it enabled you to then move on and do the next part and meet your wife.
Yeah.
And, you know, that place, I guess, was formative for many, many reasons.
It was.
And also history. I mean, I think there's something, sorry I interrupted, but there's something about, we spoke about it earlier, about the, not the legwork, that's not the work that women, as women, you did at that time for other women coming, and for yourselves, you know.
It was amazing. It was amazing. When I think, you know, you have a group of women all in the 20s, and there's this massive, massive Edwardian building with ceilings falling down, great big water stones, floors that were spongy. And we just went, well, we'll fix that. We'll fix that. Never raised a joint, never lifted a floorboard in my life, never thought twice about it. Well, we'll do that. We just, you know, that kind of, we're women and we can do this. We can do this. And we just did. Plastering. You know, we did plastering. It wasn't very good plastering, but we did it. All of that stuff that we did, it was formative, and that gives you the confidence to go on and do other things later on. You know, we did that then. I can do this now. It's different kind of stuff, but I can do this now. It was really formative, and like Angie got Ben back because of Boulevard, and that was important for Angie. And Angie learnt about feminism, you know.
And being a vegetarian.
Yeah, all that stuff, you know. All that stuff, it introduced people to a different way of life. When Izzy and Izzy came to Boulevard once, and she was like this really big, tough, butch dyke pimp. And she had a bit of a crush on Alf. And Alf wouldn't have a bar of her, she wasn't her type at all. But she came to Boulevard once, and she was really hard, tough, and she thought we were all weird. But on the way out, it was snowing, and on the way out, Alf lifted a snowball and threw it at Izzy, and Izzy was like, she was a real hard case, and we all went, fucking hell. And all of a sudden, Izzy just bent down and she started picking up this snow, and like, we ended up having this massive snowball fight outside Boulevard. And then at the end, Izzy went, "You tell anybody about that, you cunts, and I'll kick your fucking heads in, alright?" I'm like, "Yeah, alright." Izzy, I won't tell anybody that you just had a big snowball fight. So easy, I just did. Yeah, you know, like, she was allowed to be a kid for a bit, and I don't know how long it'd been since she'd allowed herself to just be a kid like that. Because she was mortified, but she loved it. It was a huge snowball fight. It did introduce people to different ways of being.
And you to a different way.
Christ, yeah. It was absolutely massive for me. It was, you know, the place I grew up, where I grew up. That's where I grew up. That's where I became. And that was a spiritual home for me. And where it is important. You know, geographically it is important. It was a boundary between the like lesbian feminist activist side of Springbank and the Hesel Road community, and you know that boundary is quite important in terms of what we achieved and what we did, the people that came into the house, and where it was in terms of time. That in the early 80s, it was, you know, it was a time of change, and you know there was all them adverts at the time, don't die of AIDS and all that business. We were all experiencing that. Do you know what? I look at some of the old photographs of silhouette that you see online nowadays. Nearly all those boys are dead. I look at them and I remember them, and they're not here anymore because they were dying of AIDS, they were dying of ignorance. They didn't know how to be, and there were combination therapies and that then. So we were all going through all that at that time. So it does feel like it was a really important moment in history, which is why I've wanted to write about it, and I've not been able to write about it. I've tried to write about it. So I'm really glad you're documenting some of the history. And Mindy said to me on the phone when I rang her and said, would you be interested in talking to Kate? Because I didn't just want to give numbers out, of course. And she said she would, and she was really proud that there was a bit of a legacy there, and it does feel important, you know. Yeah. So I'm glad you are documenting some of it. It is important. And Ray was a part of that, and it does, you know, he never came to Boulevard, but Ray was an important part of that. So I'm glad that we can formally make that connection, really.
Yeah, and I think there's something about what's interesting for me is this. You know, these are men dressing as women, being watched by women dressing as men, and women being feisty and powerful, and you know, all of this is all happening in the same. You know, you've got a landlady who's incredibly powerful. All of this power that's sort of moving between and how people are presenting themselves, identity and outward presentations and. Did you ever see Ray or any other performers anywhere else? Do you only ever remember seeing Ray?
I only ever saw Ray at St George's. I never saw any actual professional acts, but at the Vox there was a group there, and there was one bloke. I was a friend of Sandy's, and she'll tell you his name. I can't remember his name. Real baritone voice, really handsome young lad. And him and some of the older men of the Vox had this sort of drag group thing that they did informal.
Vauxhall Dragettes?
Yeah, they did a sort of informal thing. And sometimes they were actually performing, and sometimes they were just there, just dressed up in the glad rags. Not for any performance, they were just there. So we saw them quite a lot. But what was really funny about that is, as an act, they weren't very good. But when they were just there in the Vox, just in the glad rags, it was just them in the glad rags. There was nothing unusual about it, if you know what I mean. It was just like being stood next to somebody who was in the nice shoes or the bad dress. So we saw them.
Yeah.
And sometimes they gave sort of performances and sometimes they didn't. But I don't remember seeing anybody else, no.
And you don't remember seeing any women performers?
No. Apart from Ruth and the Rodens, of course. And Ruth, my memory is that it was either Ray or Ruth. At the St G's, yeah. It was 1 week it'd be Ruth and the Rodens.
Do you want to say some more about Ruth?
Oh God, we loved Ruth. We loved Pal of My Cradle Days. I will never forget. I can sing every word. Ruth and the Rodens
were a lesbian band.
No. Ruth was lesbian. Hilary was straight, the drummer, and then there was a guitarist. Don't know what he was. He was just the guitarist. I don't know whether he was gay or straight. Ruth was very obviously a butch lesbian, suited and booted, absolutely, unashamedly. She had the most beautiful country and western voice. Again, she very much identified as a woman. She was suited and booted. She never identified as trans. Today, would that be different? Don't know. No idea. She had the most magnificent voice, and she had a repertoire of country and western, and we loved her. We loved Ruth. and everyone loved Ruth. She was well known on Esler Road, well respected. And yeah, she used to sing Pal of My Cradle Days, and I've never forgotten it. She was beautiful, she was lovely. And Hilary, her drummer, was a really good drummer. Well, I thought she was a really good drummer. I had a drum kit and I was learning how to play the drums, and I really wasn't very good at it. And I had this brand spanking new drum kit that I'd been trying to learn on. I just wasn't very good. I just knew I wasn't ever going to have a talent for it. So I decided to sell it, and then Hilary said, "Oh, I'll buy it." So she came to look at my drum kit, and I was just so chuffed that, like, my celebrity bar was quite low at the time. That Hilary was going to buy my drum kit, and then next time I saw it, it was in the St George's, and she was playing my drums that she'd bought in the St George's with Ruth and the Rodents. So I was really chuffed. And in some of the old photographs that I've seen, it's my drum kit in the background.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I don't know why that was important, but it was, and it just made me feel like I had some kind of connection to him. Because Ruth didn't know us, you know, she didn't. We weren't friends with her. We just were fans, really. So, but St George's again, that's where I saw.
And there were never acts on or anything at Polar Bear. What would have been? That would have just been a pub with music,
no, it was just
or
a pub. I don't ever remember there being music there either. When we were, I mean, we mostly went Friday nights and Saturday nights, pre-club. Really, nearly everybody went on a Friday night. The Women's Centre tended to have meetings on a Tuesday night, so we'd go there after the pub on Tuesday night. I never remember any acts or any music there when we went. But this would have been like early 80s, and it wasn't a music pub then. I know it is now, but it wasn't then. It was just a pub, and the locals playing dominoes would be up that end, and the dartboard was up that end, and the women would be up this end. And how it was is, like, up that end, as you went in through the front door, and there was this like horseshoe-shaped bar. This end was like little alcoves, little half-moon alcoves, and we would sort of occupy them. But up that end it was very straight, so there was like banquettes down one side and then tables and chairs down the other side, and that's where all the kind of locals, the dart players and the domino players, they all were up that end, and then we were all up this end, and we sort of colonised these little like half-moon banquet things. But there was never any music, never any acts. I never saw anybody in there.
And these would have been, you would have also gone there pre-Silhouette?
Yeah, pre-Sil, yeah.
So can you say something about Silhouette, as your experience of Silhouette?
It was the first Silhouette, predominantly. It was an institution, and it was a funny place because you had to get through Molly on the door. If Molly didn't like you, she wouldn't let you in. She was very flaky about who that was. You could be a member, you had a membership card, but if she didn't like the look of you weren't coming in. So she could be a bit of a demon. And she was this funny old sort of like late middle-aged woman with a kind of shampoo and set hairstyle. I don't know what connection she had to Silhouette other than working there, but she was sort of an unofficial gatekeeper, really. And then you would, as I remember it, it was a bit like flock wallpapery. And there was like a pool table and a bar, and people would hang around there. But then downstairs in the basement was where the dancing bit was, and that was really low ceilinged, almost certainly dangerously illegal, because I don't know how the hell you would have got out. But also, when it used to get really hot, sweat would drip off the roof. And made the dance floor absolutely lethal. You know, it was because it was a metal dance floor. And it would make it really slippery and lethal, and it would get really hot. And there was always weed in there. There was always a smell of weed, always. And it was just the best place. It was, you know, when, obviously I'm going to say this because of my age, some of the best clubbing dance stuff, you know, especially not queer stuff, but also I remember, you know, there was a really eclectic mix of, we had the Smiths alongside, like, heavy duty dance music, and it always started with the Ovaltinis or finished with the Ovaltinis. That they always used to play We Are the Ovaltinis at the end of the night. That was always the last track. It was a bit like a speakeasy, really, and there was a few local celebs used to go in there. Roland Gift used to go in there, I remember I was stood with Sandy once and I was quite excited because Roland Gift was at the bar and he'd had a hit record. And he came over and I was with Sandy at the time. And he went, all right, Sandy, everybody knows Sandy. And he said, all right, Sandy, you all right? And she went, I don't care if you've been famous. I didn't like you then and I don't like you now. Fuck off. And he just went, oh. I said, Sandy. She went, well, I don't care if I had it record. So yeah, it was a bit speakeasy. It was a bit, that's my memory of it, flock wallpaper. And then of course it transferred to the other place and became much more of a club. And that was what, probably 90s, early 90s, something like that. And I loved that as well, because by then I was also into like going clubbing and doing all that stuff. And it was still, you know, gay night. We went on the gay night, but it was a bit of all sorts. Whereas Silhouette, I don't know if we used to go to Silhouette on a gay night, or if it was always like that, or if it was always. Yeah, I don't remember. All I know is that when I went, it was anything goes, and everyone was welcome, and it was a bit alternative and a bit lefty and a bit. It wasn't LA's or Trog Bar or any of those town centre kind of places. It wasn't like that. Nobody I knew from Gypsyville would be going to Silhouette. Nobody. I never knew anybody there other than the people I'd met through the women's centre and that kind of community. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Felt like home.
So if you look, given we've been talking, I've no idea how long we've been talking, but if you look back and think and reflect on this morning, and is there anything that, what is it that draws to mind? You know, if you think about everything that's been said.
It was a wonderful time for me personally, Boulevard in particular. But of course, Boulevard, you know, we started talking about, you were talking about these concentric circles, and Boulevard was in one of your circles for the reasons that we've discussed. But for me, it was the centre of my circle. It was the beginning of everything that became. I wouldn't be who I was without that. And that does include the queens of the Alex and the Vox and Ray and Candy LeBarry and Bobby Mandrell and Clarice and Sandy. Sandy was instrumental, and Mindy and all that. That is the beginning of my circle. My circle is a part of your circle in a smaller way, and it was everything. I'm so grateful that I had all that. I'm so grateful. That's what I have gratitude really. And also the other thing I would say about it is I forgive myself for my mistakes, because my God, there were plenty. You know, oh my God, there were plenty. You know, like calling people mongrels and telling rape jokes and stuff. I was a working class woman. I didn't know better. Gratitude. Glad to be a part of that circle and a part of your circles now, because that means that some of this story will carry on. So that really.
Yeah, beautiful.
Can I show you some other photos?
Yeah, are you happy for me to record you talking about them?
Yeah. This is some of the work that Mindy, Alf and I did on Hessel Road.
So do you want to say what's in the picture?
Yeah, it's a photograph. Pass it back. There's a photograph. It's a Pretty Polly tights advert that shows an egg with some legs coming out of it, and the legend says, legs as soft and smooth as the day you were born. And it's been graffitied over by Mindy, Alf and I with a sign that says, hairy-legged, angry women, break out of your shells. So that's some work that Mindy and Alf and I did.
This was a billboard on
Hessel Road, Boulevard. Yeah.
Oh God, you know what I'm just talking about? We've just been talking about buying space on that to put up some of the images from the project. So wouldn't that be funny to put that back? Wouldn't it be great to put this back on it?
That would be fun. Yeah, that would make Mindy laugh.
Right.
That's a bit of graffiti that we did. This is Angie South, Alfie Meleyal and Sandy Smith with Gemma, our dog. And it's the side of Hull FC grounds. And I can't remember why we'd graffitied it, but graffiti is double women's symbol and it says, "Witches wear here," with a really badly placed... I don't know whether we meant "we are here" or "we're here." It could be a badly placed graffitied apostrophe, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and isn't it funny? We just look so young,
don't we?
Whenever I look back at things, and you just think, God, I was a baby.
Yeah.
Doing all of this really radical thinking and being. And actually quite grown-up stuff, buying houses and...
Yeah, and doing our own conveyancing.
And all of that.
Because we just thought we could. And this is my drum kit with me.
Oh, God, that's gorgeous. So tell us what you're wearing and the...
Yeah, probably got my women's symbol axe, and I've got a fag in my hand as well. I've got a red sweatshirt and shaved mullet. I've got a mullet hairstyle. My glasses, I love my glasses. They were John Lennon glasses. Of course, NHS, cheap as chips, but I thought they were super cool. Yeah, and I've got a fag in my hand as well then.
And it's a bright red kit, and you sat against a bright red window.
My bedroom was all red, black and grey. Yeah.
Great. And also the axe. We didn't record the story of the axe. Do you want to say about the axe?
I think I don't
the
know
axe of why you... I think it's important for people to know why the axe to start with.
Right. The Laboris axe, double-headed axe, accepted lesbian symbol, because it was said to be based in... It was a symbol from ancient Greek that was related to Sappho, the lesbian poet that was said to be a lesbian poet. I think there's one on my sideboard there, a mini one that was bought in Greece.
Noticed it earlier.
Yeah, and we all wore them, mostly silver, on chains, either in our ears or on necklaces, and we all had them. They were a really potent, powerful symbol of lesbianism, and we adorned our ears and our necks with Laboris axes. I might have one in my ear then, I'm not sure. But I certainly would have been wearing one. If not in my ear, I would have had one around my neck.
I think there's one on your ear.
Yeah, because we all had them, and we used to have to send away for them. That was the other thing, of course. You couldn't buy them in Hull. You had to send away to places like Manchester and London to get them, and from adverts in the back of Spare Rib magazine, which that was the only place you knew where to get them. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to. And then later on, and we started talking. I had a giant Laboris axe that was on the fireplace at Boulevard, and Mindy also found one subsequently, and hers was on the fireplace at Boulevard. They were really potent symbols of our household. They did fall out of favour later because some German women started to say that they'd been adopted by a Nazi regime during the war, and so German women were no longer comfortable with the Laboris axe. So it did fall out of favour, but that was why it fell out of favour subsequently, because of that connection, not because it was ever a symbol of exclusivity, as has been suggested in more recent years, as a symbol of trans-exclusionary radical feminism. I don't think it ever was that. I don't think it ever has been that, but it certainly is sometimes perceived as a symbol of that. And I think that was because it was a symbol that was worn by radical lesbian feminist separatists at the time. It was, but that didn't mean it was a separatist symbol, because it was a lesbian symbol, not a separatist symbol, that happened to be worn by lesbian separatists. And there is a distinction there, and I think that distinction has been confused in more recent years. But at the time, everybody I knew wore a lesbian Laboris axe, and I did too. And I wish I had one now, actually. I have got one. I've got one tattooed on my arm, this arm, that arm. Oh, incidentally, that's something I should say. Which arm is this arm? I've got a Laboris axe tattooed on my arm, and Mindy's got the same Labrador Sax tattooed on her arm. We went and got them done together. So Alf didn't, because at the time she was frightened of tattoos. So she was too scared to have one done. But yeah, so I still sort of wear one. So that's that. That's another a different. I think I've sent you a copy of the Vive la Similarity.
Yeah, talk to us about what you're wearing in this picture, and who is this in this picture?
Right, so there's Janine, who was the first woman raising her arm is Janine. That was Mindy's girlfriend at the time. The other women in that photograph are Mindy, Alf, and Meleyal, and we're all wearing T-shirts that Mindy had printed that say Vive la Similarity, which we thought was incredibly funny at the time, and I wish we still had them T-shirts.
I've got ambition to reprint these.
Yeah, they're great. Mindy made those, and they're great. And that was at the Women's Holiday House in Houghton in Ribblesdale. So we all went. We used to go to Houghton Women's Holiday House a lot, actually, and that's where we were, just about to go off for a hike. This is another picture of Lel, Mindy and Alf with Mindy's girlfriend at the time, Janine, and that's in the house at Boulevard.
Do you want to talk something about I'm interested in the fashion, the clothes that we're wearing as markers, I guess, of identity. And,
right.
Like if you see pictures of the time of gay men, there's a very particular uniform that reappears in a way. What do you think? What was the common thing that you would be wearing as a group at that
Combat
point?
trousers. Nearly everybody I knew had combat trousers. Quite a lot of Army Navy surplus stuff, but also some like modern takes on it. You could buy combat trousers in women's clothing shops. A lot of us wore them. We wore monkey boots. A lot of women wore Doc Marts. I never wore Doc Marts because I couldn't get them in my size. So I wore monkey boots, and white trainers were a thing.
High tops.
Yeah, high tops, white. Later on, subsequently, leather jackets became a thing, but they were in the early 80s, they were later 80s. Tank tops, oh my God, we used to wear tank tops, quite often knitted tank tops. We used to wear a lot of bright colours. In that photograph, what you can't see is Alf's probably got bright yellow trousers on. She loved the bright yellow trousers. Mindy was a real fan of fuchsia. So we used to wear a lot of colour, and this is like pre-Rainbow Pride days, but we were still quite rainbow coloured. I was kind of jeans and sweatshirt sort of girl. I looked quite butch, but I actually never have been. I've always identified as femme, if I identified at all. Then it was quite confusing. That's another thing I should say. And I will say this. The lesbian feminists always insisted that we were all women. We were women. We were just women. There was no such thing as butch femme. And there patently obviously was. The butch femme dykes on Hesle Road absolutely had that nailed. They knew exactly who they were and what they were. Because in our community, nobody ever talked about the fact that obviously there were butch femmes. Saffron was a butch, Jan Gordon was a butch, I was a femme. There were just people that just were. And I never fancied femmes. I always fancied butch women. I just did. And you could say that was kind of internalised homophobia, possibly it was, but that's the fact of the matter. That was what my sexuality was. I liked women that looked like K.D. Lang, that was the fact of it. I never fancied women that looked like Dolly Parton. It was just how it was, but we never talked about that ever. So there was this kind of
denial.
It was an androgyny that was denial of femininity, and there's a kind of sort of reverse sexism in that, in a way, that we were all the same. And also, like Carol, who had a go at me about, she swears that she never said it, but I swear she did, about my shoes. Like, why was it not okay to look girly and feminine? Why was that not okay? And you look in the photographs, so many of us have got close cropped hair, which I still do because it suits me. But so many of us back in the day, we were unadorning ourselves, and yet we were wearing dangly earrings, and there's some real kind of confusing stuff there. We had a fashion in the lesbian feminist community that was androgynous, alternative, and to some extent denying of femininity while still edging in with some degrees of femininity. Like I said, Mindy had a real thing for fuchsia. Mindy's really artistic and lovely and creative, and she's real style queen is Mindy. She's got glorious taste in clothes, but she was really good with colour. She always wore lovely colours. So there was this androgynous uniform that denied femininity, but at the same time we didn't get rid of femininity completely. It was all quite complicated, and at the time I was finding my feet. I was quite androgynous and not particularly stylish because I didn't know how to be. And so Mindy would say, oh, you should get that sweatshirt, it'd really suit you. And I'd go, I'll get that sweatshirt then, Mindy, because Mindy knew what she was doing. She still does. She's still amazing with clothes. She puts together the most amazing outfits.
Yeah, and I wonder, is that something also about raising our head above the parapet? You know, that's what I always think about, the butch femme working class ideal, which goes back to safety, is you're performing a trope, I guess, that is understood within that community, and so you're kind of trying to fit in, even though of course you're not. And
it's a shorthand to getting through the door of that safe door. It's the shorthand. Look, I'm joining you. I'm making it really obvious to you who I am. And I wonder if that's why people like Leslie didn't identify as lesbian, because that wasn't a door that they were necessarily choosing to go through. They were more comfortable in the broader community, perhaps, where they could pass anywhere, but they happened to be in this community. I don't know, but I do think, you know, there's something about you want to fit in, don't you, wherever you are.
Wherever you are.
Yeah. And my Roland Cartier shoes definitely did not fit me in. Did not. I'll never forget that. Anyway, that's Boulevard, 148 Boulevard, our wonderful home. I loved.
I stood on the spot and took the exact same photograph recently to compare the two.
Yeah, 148
very
Boulevard.
Similar. Still.
That's Mindy, who had a motorbike, of course she did.
So who was these photographs were being
developed
upstairs?
That was probably Saffron that took that.
And then being printed upstairs in the attic?
In the dark room, upstairs. Weena and Wendy, back in the day, in Boulevard, that was in my room.
Wowzers.
And Weena, I don't know whether she went back or she changed it. She subsequently decided, because her name's Edwina obviously, she subsequently decided that she wanted to be called Eddie, but we never got our head round calling her Eddie, and so we only ever knew her as Weena.
She's still Weena.
Is she still Weena? Yeah. Right, okay.
Everybody, she's only ever known as Weena, everybody.
And Wendy was a partner at the time.
Yeah, talks a lot about violence towards her within that Hessel Road community.
Yeah.
From men.
Yeah, not surprised. And this is us who bought the house. This is just after we'd actually moved in.
They look so...
Yeah, no, so young. That was us that bought the house. That was just after we'd moved in officially and we'd bought the house. Shiny that. Yeah. That was when the house was officially ours and we all lived there, and that was the front room of our living room, which, like I say, was on the first floor. And we thought it was forever. I was so happy in that. That's Saffron, me, Alf and Mindy. I was so young. Saffron was still doing she was in probably the second year of a fine arts degree at Hull College. I had my RSA typing. Mindy was had been a primary school teacher, but had recently finished. She'd just had an operation, hysterectomy, and Alf was a veterinary nurse.
And we didn't say, what work did you work after you'd finished university? What did you go on to
Social
do?
work. Well, what happened was I did access course first. Mindy encouraged me to do that. She helped me as well. So I had to do an essay to get into college, and I had to write an essay. This was to get into an access course about something that had changed the world. And it was only 1,000 words, and I had no idea. And Mindy just said to me, because she was so clever, she just said to me, write about soap. And so I wrote an essay about soap, and they accepted me, about how it changed the world. And they accepted me, and I passed the access course with flying colours. I loved it. Oh my God, I was like spiritual home. I loved it so much. And then I did a degree. That was at the Hull College of Further Ed, as it was then. You subsequently became University of Humberside, subsequently became University of Lincoln.
Yeah.
And then I did a degree at the University of Humberside, as it became. And then straight away I was offered a master's in social work at University of Hull. And I wasn't interested in social work at all, but it came with a bursary, and I was skint. So I thought, oh yeah, I'll do that then. So I did that. So I got a social work qualification and went into addictions work as soon as I finished that. So yeah, I was in
with
addictions.
women or with whoever.
Well, actually, that's a good question, because it was initially an East Yorkshire project with what was then called the Alcohol Advisory Service, and then I started working on getting grants for funding, and we got a women's project. So I started being the manager of the women's project, but then I became, like in no time, became assistant director, because I was good at what I did, and so I ended up sort of managerially involved rather than hands-on involved. I still work with clients, and then carried on career in social work for a bit, and then went into regulation of social work. So worked with qualifying councils and stuff. Then went into lecturing, of course, the trajectory. And none of that would have happened again without that lot. It just wouldn't. At that point I had an RSA in typing. That's what I had.
And some ex-high heels.
And some ex-high heels. Wish I'd kept them. And that was, we had a party for the house.
Oh.
We had a party for the house, our beautiful house. This is Meleyal and Saffron doing the actual plastering after we'd done the damp course proofing, by the way. We'd done that ourselves. We looked up how to do it. We went to a library to look up how you do damp proof course.
We probably went to Weston, down the road.
Yeah, we did. We almost certainly did. And learned how to do it, and then did it, and then learned how to do plastering, and then did that. I'm really proud of that. That's me being incredibly butch. I'm showing you that.
Be fascinating to know what people that, I know the Equases were one side, but this is where the fountain is, isn't there? So do you know what I mean? Lots of people were looking. They knew you were there.
They knew we were there. Yeah. The fountain wasn't there then.
Oh really?
No, there was nothing there. The fountain had been destroyed during the war, or it had been removed. So there was nothing there at all, and so the fountain didn't exist when we were there at all. So it was subsequently put back. There was just this great big space right in front of the house. So
people were watching this.
Oh, they knew, yeah. And the house on the other side was, I don't know if the whole house was, but there was some probation flats in there. So there was a real transient population on the other side of the house. The Equases was on the right as you looked at the house, and there was the transient population in the other side. But at one point, Mindy had a grass plant on a windowsill upstairs, and one of the neighbours from next door came and knocked at our door and said, I just wanted to tell you, you better move that grass plant, because I know the law's looking at me, and if they see that grass plant on your windowsill, they'll have you as well. So I just wanted to tell you. And we were like, oh right, okay, thank you very much. So that's the only time we ever met any of the neighbours on the other side at all. So it was my poor child in his dangerous house. Poor love.
He looks very happy.
He was. He remembers it incredibly fondly, although he'd left by the time he was 4. So he's got partial memories of it, but what memory he does have is really happy.
Yeah, and I guess, would Ben be around at that point? Andrew's Ben would be around?
He was, but Ben was younger than Bill, so by that time Ben was still a chunky toddler, really. Bill's probably about... Yeah, he's probably about 2 or 3 years older than Ben. 2 years older than Ben, I think. But yeah, Angie got Ben back because she had safe housing. So Ben lived with us for a little bit. And, you know, Angie struggled with Ben. She'd probably say that herself. She did struggle, but she really was doing her best. And she got a lot of support from us, of course. Of course she did. Because we loved her, and she's ever so funny as Angie, you know. She's really great to live with, and no, we loved Angie, you know. We loved her, and she loved us. She wasn't like a lodger. She was a part of the house, you know. And this is one of the last photos that was taken with all of us, and that was Denny, unfortunately, who was Mindy's partner at the time. But it's a shame that, because, you know, the rot had already set in at that point. It was a shame. I really regret that we ever met her. But, you know, things happen for a reason, and who knows? Maybe you know, maybe we would have all become really dependent on Boulevard, or maybe we needed to fly to break free of it. So I wouldn't say she did us favours, because she certainly didn't, and I try not to hang on to any kind of negative ill will or whatever, and I try not to do that. I couldn't, in all honesty, wish her well, but I don't wish her harm, but I couldn't wish her well. But she definitely destroyed Boulevard. She really did.
And friendships
that were so important. Yeah. But, you know, we all went on to do all right. And I have to show you this, because she was a very important person in our lives. This is Liz Crotty. You must ask Mindy about Liz Crotty.
So what am I looking at in this picture?
Right, in that picture there's an image of a half life-sized older woman doll, rag doll. Mindy made her. She's called Liz Crotty. Liz Crotty was very much a part of the household. Liz Crotty had a complete history. She had relationships. She was the matriarch of the house, and she lived in our living room. And she was dressed like an old woman. Mindy had made her for something. I don't know what on earth Mindy had made her for, but she was half life size. And we all loved Liz Crotty, and she had this full history. And she was very much she was an older woman dyke, and she lived in Boulevard, and she lived in our living room. And we all absolutely adored her. And everybody that ever came to Boulevard knew about Liz Crotty.
Fascinating. So this is a symbol of a matriarch, or a...
Yeah, she was a matriarch. She was our matriarch. She was... we all revered Liz Crotty, even though she was a creation. You know, we all give a nod to Liz Crotty. We just loved her. She was part of the house. She was part of the mythology of the house, you know, part of the history and the fabric of it. Mindy had made her originally, and Mindy had her way before she ever moved into Boulevard, so she moved into Boulevard with Mindy. And you know, we'd say things like, oh, don't say that in front of Liz, you know, she'll go right off on one, and sorry Miss Crotty, you didn't, whoops, sorry, and it was just, she was just there, and we loved her. We all loved her, but we had all this history, and there's loads of photographs of Liz Crotty about, lots of people had photographs taken with Liz Crotty, and Mindy will tell you much more about her, I think. Yeah, So that's Liz. And these I think you've seen. I think I've sent you that one, I think, which is the Vive la Similarity picture.
Yeah.
I showed you the Women of Hull Against Militarism.
The turning point.
The turning point, the very important turning point. And that's a picture of me with my son and with Saffron and a friend who helped us with the house boulevard. And
pave the way.
And this is a picture of our garden, which doesn't look much, but we've just started doing...
To clear it.
We just started to clear it. When we started clearing it...
There's a picture of you or somebody chopping things down.
Yeah. There was the garden was completely overgrown. It was full of things like old mattresses and bikes and bedsteads and all kinds of stuff. And so we just started clearing it. But we also had a Bring a Brick party, and we had this big party at the house. And we invited everybody to bring a brick, and then we had a paintbrush by the front door and we had a big stack of bricks for people who didn't bother bringing bricks, because we had a big hole in the garden wall at the back. And so we said we wanted everybody to bring a brick and paint the name on the brick, and then when we had enough bricks we rebuilt the wall at the back, and so it had all the names of all the people that had attended the party. And what's nice about that is Nicola, who is now an author, lives in Seattle. Her sister came to that party, and her sister subsequently died of a heroin overdose. And Nicola didn't know that her sister's name was on a brick on the garden wall. So it was nice to be able to tell her that. Now, we're talking, 40 years subsequent, it's probably washed off. It was gloss paint, but it's probably gone now. But nevertheless, it was nice for Nicola to know that her sister's name might still be on a brick on that garden wall. There was a big hole in the wall, so we rebuilt it.
And there's men in the photo.
Yeah, those two men were rent boys that Sandy knew. I can't remember the names, but they were pals of Sandy's, and they probably almost certainly were part of the Vauxhall Alex crowd. They were definitely rent boy friends of Sandy's.
And potentially not with us anymore.
Possibly not. When I looked at the photos of Silhouette, I've been really shocked at how many of the boys that I remember that I know are not here anymore. And I just think, because when I moved to Brighton, I was working in HRV, and I worked in a project. I was director of a project in Brighton that was specifically targeted towards gay men with mental health issues or life challenges. So it was specifically targeted at that demographic. And those young men, this was right at the very beginning when people were dying. I mean, we lost so many young men. I went to so many funerals at that time. They didn't know how to adhere to drug medication. They just didn't know how, it was so challenging at first. They were having to take it like every 3 hours, even during the night. And these were men with chaotic lives. And quite a few of them had deliberately become infected because they wanted to become a part of the community. I know that sounds bizarre, but that's what they told us. They told us that it was a sense of belonging, that they could access services and things like that. And I think about them men that I worked with who really struggled to adhere to medication regimes because of chaotic lifestyles. And it makes me think about some of the boys I used to know in Hull. And they were, they had drug problems, they had alcohol problems. They were similar kind of young men, and they didn't have the services that Brighton had. They didn't have all the support services. So I think it's really not surprising, actually, that a lot of them couldn't adhere to the drug medication programmes, and they died. They did die of age-related illnesses. Because if in Brighton we couldn't offer better services, that weren't going to be offered in Hull. So I'm kind of not surprised. A lot of them young men were, they were challenged, or they were uneducated, or they lived fast and loose.
At a time where that was what was normal of the
everybody was
scene.
doing.
Whether you were gay man or lesbian woman.
Yeah.
Was just...
Yeah, and also, let's not forget, this was only the 80s, so we were all becoming sexually liberated. I never had so much sex, sleeping, not monogamy, it was all the rage, we all sleep with anybody. It was like, it wasn't the 60s anymore, it wasn't even the 70s, we were all shagging everybody in the 80s, and gay men were no different. And so I look at those photos of the sill and I just think, yeah, it's such a shame so many of them lads are gone. I mean, many of them have gone anyway, because some of them were older than me, and I'm 66, 67. So that's the natural order of things, but some of them it's illness related. Such a shame. Anyway, do you want another drink? I should have offered you another drink.
No. Shall we? I'm going to press stop.
Okay.
Are we done for now?
Yeah.
I can put it back on.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.